There was an ONI team that fueled the elite civil war, that reunited a Spartan with her father, that captured Jewel Mdama, that arrested Halsey in front of Blue Team, that was invited onto Sang Helios by the Arbiter himself, that attended the Voy Memorial and saved Earth from a Covenant battlecruiser. Of course, I'm talking about the legendary and possibly infamous Kilo 5. In this video, we're going to go over the team's composition, their service record, and their impact on the universe. But first, I'd like to thank our Patreon supporters like Michael the Eagle Scout, Boomerang, Bobby John _343, and Trevor Palamuso. Speaking of Patreon, the poster is almost finished. Our artist, Lady Yona on Instagram, has been doing a fantastic job. I should be sending those out pretty soon here, as well as the stickers and letters. So thank you guys for your support. Honestly, you keep me from getting sponsors. So thank you. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. Kilo 5 is made up of 5 people. Well, really 6 if you count Black Box, 8 if you count Mike Spencer, 10 if you count the engineers, which we'll eventually get to, so it could be any number of those. First and foremost is the heir to the ONI throne, Serin Osman, formerly Serin 019. Serin was a 6-year-old child when she was abducted from the streets of the colony world known as Cascade. Her mother was a prostitute and an addict. Serin was forced to basically live on the streets and would regularly have to resort to eating garbage from dumpsters throughout the city. She might be the only Spartan where getting abducted probably saved her life, or put her in a more stable situation. However, she had a teacher that cared for her and would try to help her as best she could. And we will come back to that teacher here, and if I had to guess, an hour to an hour and a half. I don't know how long this video will be, but it's sizable. In the Spartan program, Serin would progress until the age of 14, where her body would reject the augmentations, and she was taken from that program and put into the Office of Naval Intelligence. Now, I know that's kind of a weird way to put it, because the Office of Naval Intelligence was the one putting this program on, but taken out of the program and put into ONI. They repaired the damage that the augmentation process put on her body, and they enrolled her into officer school. What's interesting here, though, is that she was taken from the Spartans before this funeral ceremony, and the other Spartans were told that she was killed. Unlike other washouts like Vahajad and Musa, who the Spartans knew survived but washed out of the program due to obvious reasons. Serin was given the last name Osman and was groomed, for lack of a better term, by the Queen of Oni, Margaret Perengoski, to become her successor. Serin, even though she may be the one person that the Admiral would forgive if she failed, thought that she better not test that theory. Next, we get to Naomi 010. Now, the history of Naomi could be an entire 2-hour video in itself, so I'll give you the shortened version. She was born on the colony world of Sansar and was taken from her parents at the age of 5. Almost 6. Like the other Spartans, she was augmented at the age of 14 and has spent the better part of 30 years as a frontline commando. She participated in legendary escapades just like the rest of the surviving Spartans, like the rest of the full Spartans, I should say. She participated in things like Silent Storm. She was on Seoba, Zois. She was on Fred's Red Team that fell to the surface of Reach, and though she didn't get off the planet with the Master Chief and the rest of Blue Team, she did get off the planet alive. In doing so, surviving, and this isn't a joke, 6 Mac round strikes to the surface, which is wild. In a recent Halo Waypoint Chronicle, she's digging herself out of those craters. Now we get to the 3 ODSTs of the team, starting with Malcolm Geffen, mostly called Mal. Mal was born in a place called Wolverhampton in the United Kingdom. Folks across the pond get really mad at me when I say a place called before I say the name of their cities. I don't know why. Mal enlisted in the Marine Corps when he was 18 years old and became an ODST. His good friend, Vasily Beloy, was born in Russia and, like Mal, joined the Marines and became an ODST. The pair of them were on the same ODST squad with another man named Emmanuel Barraquet. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The three of them would even be able to hijack a Covenant Spirit dropship on a planet called Ember in 2551. Unfortunately, Emmanuel wouldn't survive the war, but we'll talk about his impact on the other two here in a few minutes. The third ODST on the team was named Leanne Devereaux. She was born and raised in northern Canada, and just like the others, joined the Marines and became an ODST. Now, she sort of has this reputation of being just a pilot and doesn't get her hands dirty, but that couldn't be further from the truth. First off, pilots are badasses in their own right, but Dev here has been in the muck, just like every other ODST. In fact, during this trilogy of books, she's the one that saves the other ODSTs numerous times. Those are the 5 military persons on the team, but there's more to come. There was the expert on elite languages and cultures, Professor Evan Phillips. Unfortunately, there isn't much information on the professor's early life. We know that he was a linguistic xenoanthropologist in the Wheatley University in Australia before his entrance to the team, which is before everyone except for Osman. But that's pretty much all we know about him. Next, we have the artificial intelligence known as Black Box, otherwise known as BB. Now, BB is really the heart and soul of the team. By far, he has the most personality and wit, and he really is just a delight to read, both in this trilogy and other sources of media, which he appears actually quite a lot in. He was created on August 17th, 2552 from the brain of Dr. Graham Albin, which that is actually quite a big deal. Dr. Albin was a doctor that worked for the Office of Naval Intelligence. More specifically, he worked in the Spartan 2 program as a psychiatrist, psychologist, and neuroscientist. Dr. Albin hated the program, hated himself for participating in the program, and very much hated Halsey. And in March of 2532, he took his own life in a way that caused the least amount of damage to his brain. He did this, as we learn in his suicide note to Admiral Parangoski, which I will read near the end of this video, to preserve his brain for the AI program. And he pleads with the Admiral to use his brain to create an AI that would directly work to make the Spartans' lives better, something that BB definitely does. For the first few months of his existence, BB was the personal AI to Admiral Parangoski before being transferred to her heir, Serin Osman. Finally, we come to the last 2 additions to the team that have immense value and importance. Requires adjustment and Leaks Repaired. Requires Adjustment was a Covenant engineer, and Leaks Repaired was created by the engineers recovered from Onyx. Before we get into the actual service history, let's go over a few nicknames. I've already started with a couple. So Malcolm Geffen is typically referred to as Mal, Vasily Beloy as Vaz, Devereaux as Dev, Phillips as Professor or Prof, Requires Adjustment as Adj, and Leaks Repaired as Leaks. Naomi, just Naomi. And Serin as either, captain or admiral or Osman or something like that. So, just thought I should say that so that you guys understand what I'm talking about. The first information that we actually get from the team comes before the team even comes together. Serin Osman and Professor Phillips meet Avumed Telkan, a Singhili shipmaster and leader of the Servants of the Abiding Truth. And he says something that's really interesting to me. He says, a god that makes tools is still a god, obviously referring to the Forerunners and what they left behind. This should give you some idea of what the Servants of the Abiding Truth still believe religiously after the fall of the Covenant, and, for lack of a better term, the truth coming out about the Forerunners. They still believe that the Forerunners are gods and that their tools are holy. Now, these 3 are meeting in the colony of New Lanelli. Now, that's L-L-A-N-E-L-L-Y. When I made a short about this, someone told me that the L-L, that this is a Scottish term or a Scottish name, and the L-L could be pronounced like a TH, so it could be Thanelli, or Thanetheli, I don't know. So I'm just going to say Lanelli, okay? That could be wrong, and I apologize for that. I'm just a dumb American, as you can see. Now, the Professor Phillips, spoke fluent Singhili, and he was tasked with finding an elite dissident to arrange this meeting. At the meeting, he was used as an interpreter first, but Telkan actually spoke fluent English. In fact, during the war, he worked as a field master, but while he was in space, he worked as a translator for his shipmaster and supreme commanders. Basically, he would intercept transmissions from humanity translate them, and then give them to his commanders. So Telcam and Serin Osman spoke, but not after having Phillips leave. Osman makes the comment about not preferring to use civilians like this because Phillips at this point hadn't been cleared to know what Osman was talking about. At least, like I said, not yet. Telcam and Osman talk about how too many lives have been lost in the war, and the two species should be able to live out of each other's way. Telcam then says that humanity has colonies all over space, and Osman tells him that not all humans like the UEG and the UNSC, and that humans kill other humans. Then Telcam says something pretty funny. He says how tangled your lives are, even though, I don't think I've said it yet, but he's planning to do the exact same thing. He's planning to start a revolution, a revolt against the Arbiter, to start the elite civil war. That's the whole mission of the team here. Osman tells a little lie to Telcam. She tells him that if they thought that the Arbiter would survive as leader or win this civil war that they're about to start, that she would be doing these deals with him. She also says that an unstable elite society is no good for humanity, which is another lie. In fact, an unstable elite society is exactly what Osman and Perengoski want to happen here. Telcam then tells Osman that the blasphemy that humanity has been spreading has to stop. And Osman says that they weren't meaning to be blasphemous, that they weren't meaning to insult elite religion, but they just wanted the elites to know what Halos actually did, what they actually were. And Telcam then again does something pretty interesting. He leans in and he gets really close to Osman, like nose to nose. And he says that your god died, and that's what makes him eternal. Basically asking, what's the difference? After a brief conversation about theology and science, Telcam then promises that if ONI, Osman, arms him and stays out of their way, then when they seize power, when they kill the Arbiter, they will leave humanity alone. They then parted ways. Basically, this was just an initial meeting to get the ball rolling for weapons handoffs later on. On January 26th, Malcolm Geffen and Vasily Beloy arrived in Sydney, Australia. This is obviously Mal and Vaz. They were there to meet with Margaret Perengoski, and the two were absolutely terrified, shaking in their boots, staying up all night. The two of them each had over 100 combat drops in the most devastating battles of the Human Covenant War. However, being brought in front of a 90-year-old woman, the Queen of Oni, had them shivering in their timbers. They know they're headed to Bravo 6 to meet with Margaret Perengoski. They just don't know why. They talk about how if ONI needs ODSTs, they send a battalion, not just two of them. And if they were to just send two of them, why would it be these two? What makes these two special? When they finally get there after a brief side mission where they... I told you I would talk about Emmanuel, and the three of them had this pact that when the war was over or when they get back home to Earth, they would go to a bar called the Flying Dutchman, I think. I think it's called the Flying Dutchman. They would go to this bar and they'd have a drink together. Well, Emmanuel didn't survive the war. And so Vaz and Mal are in Australia, in Sydney. They go looking for this bar and it's gone. The Covenant attacked Sydney as it did multiple cities throughout Earth or all around Earth. And so it's just a pile of rubble. And so they find its approximate location, someone gives them a drink, and they toast their fallen friend. And as they're leaving, they hear this sort of faint clapping. They turn around and they notice that all the construction workers who are clearing the debris are applauding them for fighting in the war, for fighting for humanity, and ultimately winning the war. When they finally get to Bravo 6, they are brought into a conference room that looked like it hadn't been used in years. It had these old maps and whatnot on the walls, and that's when they run into another ODST, Leanne Devereaux. They make a joke about her not being the stripper they expected, and she retorts that they're not the strippers that she was expecting, and that she wants her money back. Now, I think it's important to mention here that this joke isn't done out of sexism or malice or anything like that. These two male ODSTs walk into a room, see a woman, see that she has an ODST patch, realizes that she is one of them, and they start this soldier-to-soldier banter that is sort of expected among ODSTs, meeting each other. ODSTs are like the best of the best when it comes to Marines, and they go through the hardest missions, and people like that tend to have somewhat of a crass sense of humor. Dev then realizes that she recognized them. She asked them if they were the ones that stole that Spirit dropship, and they respond that it actually was them. During this conversation, the door opens, and the tallest, scariest woman that they had ever seen in their lives walks through the door. Even though she wasn't wearing her Mjolnir power armor, it was obvious to everyone that she was a Spartan, Naomi 010. Mal cracks a joke to her, expecting some of that soldier-to-soldier banter that he got from Devro, but Naomi just sort of blank-faced looks at him. And this is when Parangoski walks into the room, and everyone snaps to attention. She's followed by Osman and Phillips. They all sit down, and they're all briefed. Their mission is to break the elites, set clans against each other, sow discontent, arm Sangheili dissidents, and finish the elites without ever losing a human life. They're also told about Port Stanley, a stealth corvette that the 6 of them would be living in for the foreseeable future. And then they are introduced to their 7th member at this point, Black Box, who actually appears as a blue box. Thought, that might be important to mention. He's not actually a black box, he's a blue box, his avatar. The team makes their way to the ship the following morning, and this is when Osman thinks about the task that she has been given. She was taken by ONI after her failed augmentations. She had been trained for naval command, but she never actually commanded a ship before. However, everyone else on the ship was pretty excited. A corvette is a huge ship for just 6 people, so pretty much everyone is going to have their own cabins, which is something that the ODSTs and well, Naomi might have, but something that the ODSTs certainly have never experienced. Now, during the entire time that the team has been together this far, which admittedly has only been a few hours at most, Naomi has been giving Osman these looks, these odd looks, like she knew Osman from somewhere, but she just couldn't place it. So as they're getting ready to leave Earth, Naomi comes to the bridge of the Port Stanley, and Osman asks if Naomi wants to ask her anything, and Naomi responds that she feels like she knows the commander, her new commander, from somewhere, but she just can't pinpoint where from. And Osman tells her that it had been a long time, but back then she wasn't Osman. In fact, she didn't even have a surname back when they knew each other, and this is when Naomi realizes that Serin Osman used to be Serin 019. And with that out of the way, that awkward tension out of the way, they jump from Earth. But actually, there's one other thing. As they're getting ready to jump from Earth, as they're initiating that jump, they receive a transmission. A UNSC ship has exited slipspace above a planet called Venezia, or Venezia. I always said Venezia, but I think it's actually pronounced Venezia. I'm going to say Venezia. Okay. It's not super important here, but something to note for later on. The team then heads to New Lanelli for their very first arms transaction with Avumed Telcam, but before they do, they get some more communications. The ODST's old squad mates have sent them some messages, and Naomi does something pretty interesting here. As they're receiving their messages, Naomi asks if there's any update on John. Those are the words that she actually used. She says, quote, "Any update on John," end quote. And BB tells her that the UNSC isn't giving up hope on finding him, but it doesn't look good, basically. She then asks about Halsey. And this is actually pretty important. She's told that Halsey didn't make it off reach, that she died in the glassing, which is sort of the official story, I think even till, modern canon. But this is a lie. Osman actually knew at this point that Halsey made it off reach, took Kelly, and made it to Onyx. She knew that Lord Hood sent Blue Team to help her, so she knew that this was a lie, and yet she still said it. They then make contact with Kilo 39, whose actual name is Mike Spencer, who gives them some information on the happenings of Sanghelios, and after that, they finally make contact with Telcam to arrange this weapons transfer. They all suit up and they head down to deliver the weapons, and really not much of note happens here, but it is worth mentioning that the meeting is pretty tense, for pretty much everyone save for Osman and Phillips. For the last time they saw an elite, the ODSTs and Naomi, it was during the war. This was weeks after fighting stopped. The war raged for 28 years, and these guys have lived their entire lives within the war with the Covenant, fought them for decades, and now they have to play nice. And like I said, although nothing of note happens during the meeting, something odd does happen as the elites and their brute subjects leave. Vaz, Phillips, and Osmond are in a warthog that actually delivered the weapons. Mal is in an overwatch position just in case, and he sees this man, a human man. This man was a survivor of the planet's glassing that somehow lived on the planet for 7 years. He saw the dropships and came running for help. This is really unfortunate, both for the team and for the man. Unfortunate for the team because they're ONI doing a questionable mission outside of naval approval, and this man could be a witness to what they just did. Give weapons to Singhili dissidents, in which we have a standing treaty with, or ceasefire with, that they're going to go try to kill. It's unfortunate for the man because his would-be saviors are ONI doing a questionable mission outside of naval approval, and he could be a witness. He couldn't be allowed to stay on Port Stanley, and the team even wondered if Osmond would just kill him outright and be done with it. They all sort of know that Parangoski would just kill him and be done with it, but would Osmond? They ultimately decide to take him onto the ship and confine him in some quarters, some living quarters. They do this in a place where he wouldn't be able to learn much, and they decide that they're going to do that, keep him there, and then drop him somewhere safe. From there, they head to a planet called Rains, another glass planet, to pick up the fella I spoke about just a few minutes ago, Mike Spencer. This pickup, however, would be much more exciting than the drop-off of weapons. They touch down. Vaz and Mal find Spencer while Devro sits back in the Pelican. Spencer crawls out of the mines underneath the ground. This planet was a mining colony, and when it was glassed, the mines, at least some of them, had survived, so they're livable down there. But as Spencer is telling them this, a group of jackals appear. They make themselves known, and they're armed. Devra lets the team know that the jackals are there as well at the dropship, and the jackals then approached the team on the ground and started talking to them. They were worried that the ODSTs had looted the mine, but they assured the jackals that they hadn't taken anything from the mine, and whatever is down there is free for the jackals to grab. They don't go down into the mines to grab anything. In fact, they grab Mal. And again, the team tries to talk their way out of this sort of growing, this escalating situation, and Vaz gets fed up, grabs one of them, puts the muzzle of his gun underneath his chin, and tells them one last time to get the hell out of here, or we're gonna get to work. That didn't work, so they got to work. Mal shoved Spencer to the ground as plasma darted over their heads. Mal then killed their leader. Spencer joined into the fight, shooting jackals as well, with Vaz doing the same. Jackals all get killed, and the team is alright. Now, this seems like a small squabble, but it ends up being somewhat important on two fronts. First off, the team takes the jackals and freezes them on the Port Stanley to use later on. The jackals also put out a hit on 2 ODSTs. Though they don't know who Mal and Vaz are, they still put out this hit. It's something called a Mav Oot, and we'll talk about it a little later when the team finds out about it. From here, they jump to link up with a ship called the UNSC Monte Cassino to offload Spencer and their glassing survivor. But as they wait to get closer to the ship, something happens. Earlier on in the book, a UNSC ship called the Eridani is having technical issues. They're above that planet called Venezia, the one I mentioned earlier. This planet will be very important later on, which we'll talk about, but this ship is having reactor problems, and the planet wouldn't let them offload personnel or land for repairs. This is because Venezia was an insurrectionist safe haven, and the UNSC was just not welcome on it in any way, shape, or form. So, as the crew just sit there, waiting in the system that all of this is happening in, they see this huge flash of light, and then nothing. The Eridani's reactors had blown up, completely killing everyone on board, which were completely avoidable deaths, had Venezia just helped or let them help themselves. The Monte Cassino would then spend the next few hours scanning the wreckage of the Eridani looking for survivors. Obviously there aren't any, but it is, standard protocol to do so. And while they're doing this, Venezia would hail them, telling them that they need to back off or Venezia would open fire. The Monte Cassino responds that they're just looking for survivors. They strongly urge Venezia to stand down, but if they don't, they'd have to return fire. And Venezia responds that they were going to do that anyway. And this is a pretty common theme for the insurrection, particularly after the war with the Covenant. The UNSC is for the most part concerned with putting humanity back together again. And typically, they don't really want to fight the Innies. typically, the innies just assume that the UNSC is hostile and fires first, which is exactly what happens here. Even though there are multiple examples after the war of any planets being known by ONI and the UNSC and are left completely alone. The UNSC sort of leaves them be. They don't want to fight humans at this point, for the most part. But Venezia opens fire on the Monte Cassino with a Covenant AAA gun, and they miss. The Monte Cassino pretty effortlessly then blows up that ground gun, which is another pretty common theme in the post-war. The innies drastically overestimate themselves and get put in their place pretty quickly. We see this happen time and time again, where UNSC is here, we're just looking for survivors, we're not trying to fight. Or we're looking for X, we're not trying to fight. We're looking for information, we're looking for how you're, away, how you're hiding from the Guardians later on. That's way later on, but you get the point. And innies are immediately hostile, assuming that the UNSC is going to be hostile, and then they get slapped. Just absolutely demolished. They get put into their place pretty easily by the UNSC. The thing about the insurrection is that, for the most part, you're not going to be able to take on the UNSC. I'm so sorry. Like, I know there are a lot of, people within the Halo community that think the insurrectionists are right based on A, B, and C, which may be true. The fact of the matter is, if you're going to fight ONI, you're going to fight the UNSC, really, you're just throwing your lives away. I talk about it in a lot of shorts, where it doesn't matter how right you are. The people with the real power are the people with nukes, mechs, and the ships to use them. Even, like the UEG's civilian government, they don't really have any real power, because the UNSC and ONI have the nukes, mechs, and the ships to use them. They can make laws, they can do whatever they want, much like Venezia, much like other insurrectionist planets. They can do whatever they want. But if you're going to fuck with the UNSC is going to fuck back. Anyway, after this, the Monte Cassino blows up that AAA gun, and then it pulls back. They take Port Stanley stowaways, that glassing survivor and Mike Spencer, and then Osmond makes a mental note to look into Venezia closer. Now, this is hugely important. Everything that happens on Venezia from this point onward, which is an entire book's worth, the entire third book, Mortal Dictata, could have either not happened, or could have been omitted, or could have been handled by another team. But since Kilo 5 was here and Osmond saw this happen, they're the ones to deal with it, which gets a little awkward, and we'll go over that later on. But obviously, Venezia would have to wait because their next mission is insanely important. Since the fall of the Covenant, engineers, or Huragogs, the little floaters in Halo 3 ODST and Reach, have become exceedingly rare. But Kilo 5 has been tipped off about one being transported to the elites by brutes. So they hightail it to Sangheli Space, the URS system to be specific, which is Sanghelios' system. And while they're getting ready for this mission, they get news about that Mav Oot that I talked about a little bit earlier. Now, this is effectively a bounty for Jackals. Anyone who brings back an ODST's head with the matching neural transponder would be paid for that bounty. Not alive, dead. Basically, the Jackals have put out a hit on the ODSTs that were fighting to exfil Mike Spencer back on Reigns, even though all the Jackals didn't survive, and they don't even know who they're going to go fight, or they don't even know who they're trying to hunt down. But after they learn about this, they are briefed on their mission. The ship that is transporting the engineer is a ship called the Piety. It's basically just a tugboat. Really nothing special, and a pretty easy ship to take down, but they don't want to blow it up, because the Huragok is inside, and that Huragok is insanely valuable to the UNSC, and really just humanity in general. Like, the engineers really are what set the Covenant apart. They could constantly improve their technology at a rate so fast that humanity that were already playing catch-up would never be able to catch. Now, Osmond didn't want to risk the lives of her crew, so they were going through a couple different plans, and Osmond told the crew that if they thought she was going to get them killed to say so, and they'd just blow up the ship, sacrifice the engineer, and be done with it. So they came up with this plan. They would hit the ship with an EMP, then pull the ship physically into Stanley's shuttle bay, so the Piety would be inside the Port Stanley. They'd keep the doors open, though, so that just in case the brutes inside decided to scuttle the ship, most of the blast would go out rather than damage the inside of the ship. They'd breach at multiple points, kill anyone on board, and search for the engineer. But there was one small hiccup. Black Box. They kind of need Black Box to come with them, and BB really wanted to join them, so he convinces Naomi to allow him into her brain and armor. And once all of that was done, they get on their way. Black Box EMP'd the ship, Devereaux grabbed it with anchoring lines and pulled it into the Port Stanley. Once it was forced down, Vaz, Mal, and Naomi got to work. Naomi jumped onto the cockpit, literally sprang up and jumped onto it. She pulled it apart. She ripped a hole into it. Actually, she ripped open an escape hatch, but still, she ripped off Covenant metal, which is insane. She drops down into the cockpit between two brutes as the ODSTs, Mal and Vaz, breach elsewhere. The first thing that she does is she uppercuts a brute so hard that his head snaps back and it breaks his neck. She then took her rifle and started beating down on the other brute's head while choking him. After 7 or 8 hits, the brute finally let her go, and she brought her rifle to bear and fired it point blank into his face. Mal was engaged with 4 other brutes, killing 1, and Vaz was pinned against a wall with the brute on top of him, so he took out his knife and plunged it into the brute's neck, but that didn't stop the brute. By this point, Naomi had exited the cockpit and made her way to Vaz. Naomi was able to pull the brute back, and Vaz stuck his gun into the brute's mouth and fired. Mal killed another of his 4, leaving 2 remaining. Naomi punched her way through another bulkhead to watch Mal kill 1, and apparently Naomi killed the last one, but we aren't told how. We just know that she came in, sees 2, Mal kills 1, and then they call all clear. That might be a mistake on the part of the author, but, They find the engineer, but he was wearing an explosive harness that the Covenant had forced them to wear, so with everyone somewhat at a safe distance, Naomi carefully removes it. Now, the engineer is a huge find. A massive deal. But it's also pretty dangerous. If you leave them alone, they just start tinkering, and then all of a sudden you don't know how to control your own ship because they upgraded it and didn't tell you how to fly it. So this little guy had to be dealt with very carefully. Black Box was able to communicate with it, and it told him that its name requires adjustment. Adge, as he would be named later on. So they give him an ODST helmet to try to distract it, get him to tinker with that so he's not tinkering with the ship. Naomi and BB go back into the Piety to dig through it, and they find a few weapons that they actually just gave to Telcam. They also find a link to Venezia, and Jackal traders that had been operating on Venezia. After that, they drag the dead jackals that they took from Reigns into the Piety and gave them UNSC rifles because they just killed all the brutes with UNSC rifles, and they did this to frame the jackals. This ship was heading back to Avumed Telcam, and the team was currently working with Avumed Telcam, so they couldn't have him thinking that the UNSC had anything to do with this. So they plant those bodies and weapons to paint this picture that the jackals had did it, not them. But now they had an engineer and they needed to figure out how to feed it, what to do with it. So they make this yeasty sludge and spoon feed it to Adge, and as the ODSTs are doing that, they get called to the bridge. When they get there, the entire team is told that there will be a memorial service for the war on Earth. Both John and Halsey will be amongst the names to be remembered, which is somewhat heartbreaking to Naomi. They're then told that Hood is headed to St. Helios and may need them for support, and on top of that, they also have to go to a place called Onyx to uncover some sort of anomaly. Now, I haven't mentioned it in this video so far because this video is about Kilo 5, and this, while it's in the Kilo 5 books, it has nothing to do with the team this far. But Onyx was the planet chosen for the Spartan 3 program. Basically, it was their reach. Off the books and completely secret. Halsey took Kelly there in First Strike and convinces Hood to send Fred, Linda, and William in Ghosts of Onyx. William dies, Kurt dies, and a few Spartan 3s die, but Mendez, Halsey, Fred, Kelly, Linda, Ash, Mark, Olivia, Tom, and Lucy are all still alive inside this Forerunner slipspace bubble. This entire time they've been searching this Forerunner world for food and water and any information on how to get out, or any information with the outside world at all. But before they go to Onyx or the Voy Memorial, they go back to New Lanelli to give more guns to Avamid Telcam, but this time something different happens. While the captain is making the trade, Naomi spots another elite, hiding, watching. While this elite is watching, something comes up to it and hits it from behind. It looks up to find something smaller than he expected to hit him with such force, but still formidable. A human demon, Naomi. Naomi starts beating him. He tries to yell, but he literally chokes on his own broken teeth, which is hardcore. It's crazy. The ODSTs then appear and hold him down. The elite is ashamed as he gets choked out, and he wonders how he could have been so foolish to allow humans, these vermin, to sneak up on him. And now this demon is toying with him. They tie the elite up, and they load him onto the ship. And during this time, and it's something that Naomi actually enjoys doing, she takes off her helmet. And this is when this elite realizes that he's been taken down by a female, further adding to his shame. The elites are not a very progressive society, and so females are typically, housemakers or homemakers. They're raising the children, teaching the children, managing the keep while the males are out fighting, doing that sort of thing. And so to be beaten by a female is a great shame. Now the team doesn't know who this elite is, so they search his ship. They pull his nav data, and they learn that he's been to Antom and Mdama recently. They decide to see if Adge or BB could pull any information from his armor, so they have to go into his cell and actually tinker with his armor to figure this out. Vaz and Mal go in first, and the elite fought back. Then Naomi strode in, put a cattle prod in his mouth, and then zapped him with it. He fell back with this squeal. And then Adge floats in, fiddled with his chest plate, and then floated out. And a few minutes later, they had a name. Jewel Mdama. Of course, that's a really big deal to you and me. We all know who Jewel Mdama is, but the team had no idea who he is, and at this point, he really is a nobody. But eventually, he would become somebody. From here, there is a short conversation between Phillips and Jewel, mostly threatening each other, but Phillips does it in a much more friendly way. And then they head to Onyx. This is where the news is finally told to the team, including Naomi, that Halsey survived Reach and is alive inside the Onyx Dyson sphere, and the team heads that way. Now, Osmond hates Halsey. Halsey was the demon of her life, taking her as a child, which we'll come to learn was actually a good thing, like I talked about in the introduction section of this video. But then she destroyed Osmond's body, and she's actually pretty excited to have the opportunity to meet Halsey again, but this time, not as this underling, as this child who has to bend to her will, but as an adversary to arrest her. I believe the direct quote is, "Arrest the bitch for aiding the enemy." And that quote actually shocks the team. They're all stunned by this language. They haven't heard the captain use this sort of language this far in the mission. Naomi, on the other hand, has a blank expression on her face. She's a Spartan. It's as if she's trying to not react to the news that Halsey's alive, but now she'll have to arrest someone who she sort of views as a mother figure on charges that carry the death penalty. The rest of the team is also a bit torn on this. Over the course of the last few weeks, they've been drip-fed information about the Spartan 2 program. Child soldiers, experimental procedures that left some crippled, and they've sort of been primed, for lack of a better term, to hate Halsey. But on the other hand, they've come to care for Naomi, and they know that Naomi cares for Halsey. After this briefing, the team goes to the ship's wardroom to speak to Naomi directly, and this is where they get all the juicy details about the Spartan 2 program from Black Box, speaking so Naomi doesn't have to. From here, they head to St. Helios to meet with Lord Hood. Osmond, Phillips, and Vaz go to meet the Arbiter. Devro pilots the ship, following elite fighters to Vadam. The team is sort of struck with this truth that they are the first humans to land on the planet. They head down this hallway, and the entire time, Osmond is analyzing the situation. She wonders if the elites are pulling tricks that the that the Office of Naval Intelligence would do, or if this is just how they do business, no more, no less. Finally, they meet the Arbiter, who actually offers them drinks, but suggests that their menu wouldn't be to the humans' tastes, and then he shakes Lord Hood's hands. The gist of this meeting is that the fighting has stopped, and they both want it to continue like that. They want the fighting to completely cease. No complex terms, no negotiations, just simply keep the ceasefire going, which is interesting. There was no treaty signed, just a handshake deal between two species leaders. The Arbiter then takes notice of Phyllis. He was introduced as an academic who had a great interest in the elites, and the Arbiter asks him why. And Phyllis responds, and Phillips responds that the elites are an ancient and fascinating people, and the more they know about each other, the less likely they are to fight again. And then the Arbiter does something pretty extraordinary. He actually offers Phillips to come stay on St. Helios to visit the historical sites if the ceasefire holds. And this draws his attention back to Lord Hood. He promises Hood that fighting isn't in either species' best interest, and tells the Master of Fleet Masters that as far as his forces are concerned, there will be no fighting. However, there are dissidents. Not all elites follow the Arbiter, so while his forces won't fight humans, he can't promise that no elite will fight humans. Lord Hood then extends an invitation to the Arbiter to attend the memorial service at Voy, to pay his respect to the one he once called the Demon and later called Friend. The Arbiter says that he'd love to have the opportunity to do so, but he isn't exactly welcome on Earth, but Lord Hood says that may be true, but I will welcome you. And really, that's all that matters. If he came to Earth with Hood's blessing, nobody would stop him or try to fight him. They then talk about an exchange of prisoners of war. Hood doesn't know about Jul Mdama sitting in the Port Stanley as they spoke, and the Arbiter shook Hood's hand on this. And then they parted ways. The Arbiter shook Hood's hand, shook Philip's hands, and then they left, just like that. A 10-minute meeting to end a 30-year war. After St. Helios, the team then heads to Onyx, which at this point Halsey and Parangoski have decided to name Trevelyan after the person who saved it, Kurt Trevelyan, who was Kurt Ambrose, who was Spartan Kurt. Now the team has a very hard time wrapping their heads around what Onyx is at this point. A soccer ball-sized bubble, right? So a bubble literally this big in space, which is nothing, but inside of it is a shield world the size of a star system, complete with an artificial star, orbiting planets, and an inner surface that is livable. There's also some tension. They know they're going to Onyx to arrest Halsey, and they know that Naomi has some affection for Halsey. After all, Halsey was a key figure in Naomi's life, and the ODSTs tell her that she should let them take on this burden. Both to spare Naomi the emotion of having to do this to someone who she thought of as a motherly figure, but also because they know Blue Team is with Halsey, who are basically Naomi's siblings. So if they're going to hate someone for arresting Halsey, it was better that it wasn't Naomi. Inside the Dyson Sphere, an engineer is working to bring it out of that small slipspace bubble. The team is sitting on the bridge watching this happen. They don't really know what they're looking at, but they watch as all the stars that they can see vanish. There's no light, so they can't actually see it, but it's so massive that it blotted out Onyx's sun and the stars around space. As they make ready to actually go into the sphere, they again talk about arresting Halsey, and Osmond gives them the all clear to use whatever force is necessary in order to get the job done, but Parangoski wants her alive. They finally land on the outer surface of the shield world, and then the ship is kind of taken by the shield world and brought inside. It's like a housing is built around the Pelican, and then the whole thing sinks into the surface of the planet like an elevator, and then brought through the outer shell. The book then switches perspectives to Halsey as the team is approaching, and Halsey immediately recognizes Naomi, and she's super happy that Naomi's alive, but she's gutted that it isn't John. Both Halsey and Mendez then come to the next revelation at the same time that the woman in the captain's uniform was also a Spartan, though a Spartan washout, Serin 019. She then introduces herself to everyone else as Serin Osmond, formerly Serin 019, and the Spartans there, Blue Team, tell her that they were told that she had died, but they never forgot about her or the other washouts, or the deaths from the program, and how could they? You know, these, like I said, these were like their siblings, so they would never forget about them. And they even apologized for not coming after her, even though they knew that even though they thought that she was dead. Then comes the awkward part, arresting Halsey. The charges are laid out to her, acting in a way that would likely aid the enemy, kidnapping a Spartan, and that she was under military jurisdiction, she had no right to an attorney, the maximum time to be held before a trial did not apply. Basically, in short, she was ONI's property now. They take her weapon, her data pad, and Vaz cuffs her, and Blue Team then protests the cuffing. They say that it isn't necessary, but Halsey cuts them off. She tells them that it's okay, that this had to happen, and then they take Halsey and the rest of those on Onyx back to the Port Stanley. The book then shifts its perspective to Jewel Umdama, currently in the Port Stanley, hearing these new unfamiliar voices ask about someone named Halsey. It seems that Blue Team wanted to talk to her after her arrest, but Osman was under strict orders to not allow such a thing to happen. The team then moves the former shipmaster, Jewel Umdama, from the Port Stanley to a woman named Dr. Magnuson. We won't talk about her again, but it is kind of important. You should really look into it. She's the head of the ONI research site that is being set up on Trevelyan or Onyx. Basically, he'd be her prisoner from now on and would be stationed where the team just took Halsey. After Jewel is taken from the Port Stanley, one ODST faces down 4 Spartans. Vaz is standing guard either at Halsey's cell or very near it when Naomi comes up to him. She wants to speak to Halsey and ask why so much was kept from the Spartans during the program, like the cloned kids. And Vaz has orders to not let anyone speak to her. And while he's explaining this, Fred, Kelly, and Linda join Naomi. So there's one ODST trying to talk down 4 Spartans, which is a situation I don't want any part of, right? Physically, he knows he could have no way of stopping them, or really just one of them. He says that he can't disobey Osman because one day she'll head ONI and disobeying her is akin to suicide. So Fred says that he'll take it up with Parangoski directly, and he takes Blue Team away. Naomi stays there for a minute, and she decides that she wants to know more, which is significant. She asks Vaz to read her file for her and report back to her what he finds, if he thinks that she should know. And Vaz is sort of hesitant to do this. He knows that if he does, and reports back, she'll know all the gory details of her forgotten life. Or if he does it and he doesn't tell her what's inside, she'll know that it was too horrid for her to know about, which is an awkward situation for him to be in, but at the end of the day, he decides that ODSTs don't let their friends down, so he agrees. He then goes to the wardroom where Mendez, the Spartan 3s, Mal, and Dev are. And he starts grilling Mendez, asking him how he could be a part of something like Spartan 2, how he could do what he did, and then he tells Mendez that there are some things that men can't do and still call themselves men. He says that it doesn't matter what humanity was facing. The Spartan program was fundamentally wrong, and it always would be wrong. And finally, Mendez responds that he came to the same conclusion a few years ago. Now, there's something that I should discuss here. These books are pretty commonly criticized for characters being hypocritical and the book hating on Halsey. And I understand both criticisms, don't get me wrong. But here's the thing. There's, in my opinion, a difference between characters hating Halsey and the book hating Halsey. The majority of the point of view characters in these books have been told the ugly side of the Spartan 2 program. Children being kidnapped, clones who died horrible deaths, teenagers maimed in experimental surgery. So how could they not hate her? Any sane, rational human would. On the point of being hypocritical, like Parangoski, like Mendez, for hating Halsey when they signed off on it and participated in the Spartan 3 program, basically doing it again, which really could be argued that it was morally even worse than Spartan 2. But the characters are meant to be realistic, and people just are hypocritical to their own actions. As we just discussed, Mendez realized this, and later on in the trilogy, Parangoski even says that she'll basically be turning herself over to UEG authorities when she decides to retire because of the Spartan programs. So these characters realize they've been hypocritical. So anyway, after grilling Mendez, Vaz then heads off to do his homework, reading Naomi's classified top secret file. He learned that she's from the colony world of Sansar. Her family name, her surname, is Sinska. He reads weekly psychological reports. She was terrified and wanted to go home. He read the names of the doctors that signed off on those reports. One of them would have been Dr. Albin, someone who we'll talk about later on, and someone who I talked about in the first chapter of this video. He reads about her parents, how they were at first relieved to have their daughter back, who was, of course, a clone, how this clone spent 18 months dying a horrific death of a genetic disease, or what they were told was a genetic disease, and the consequences of that lie were dire. They never had another child, her mother ended her own life, and he also read the doctor that met with them when they first picked up that clone in the New Stockholm Hospital was named Dr. Kelvin. Remember that name for later on. Vaz then closed the file, sickened by what he just read, and he heads to pay Halsey a visit. He was going to kill her. He's Russian, and he remembers being taught about Nazi doctors in the Second World War, and if he shot them, if he were alive at that time and shot them, he would be hailed as a hero coming back home, and now he has a similar doctor in his mind, a similar doctor on the ship with him, and he finds himself at the door to her cell with his hand on his sidearm. He had already wished his service career goodbye. He was totally fine with the ramifications that would come with killing Halsey. And so he's standing there with, one hand on the cell door, the other hand on his pistol, getting ready to go in and shoot her. And that is when Black Box interrupted him. BB tells him that Naomi would be happier if her new friend didn't serve life in prison. He thinks about how he has no family, he has no wife, he has no kids, and really nothing to lose. But BB tells him that the Admiral, Perengoski, is much more proficient at making people suffer than people even realize. Perengoski has this reputation, but she's better than people think, so he decides to leave Halsey be. The team then heads to Earth, offloading Halsey, Mendez, Blue Team, and their Spartan 3 contingent, and they go there to attend the Voy Memorial Service. This is where Serin is told that she'll be receiving the promotion to Rear Admiral. There's also another short conversation here where Mendez tells Osman that the other Spartans decided not to look into their files, so basically at this point, Naomi is the only one to have opened that can of worms. The ODSTs also talk to Osman about the regular people that got killed and maimed during the Human Covenant War, and she asks if it offended them that there was so much focus on the Spartans, on extraordinary people, that sort of thing. And they say no. They actually say that this was, of the memorial services that they've attended, one of the better ones, because usually it's, the commanders and the officers who sat back and didn't really do anything, while the people who went out and killed and were killed were forgotten. At least in this instance, there's a premium on Spartans, but Spartans actually did do the fighting. From here, the team heads to St. Helios to take the Arbiter up on his offer to let Phillips study their historical sites. The problem, though, was that Phillips had been spending the last several weeks with the team actively trying to bring the elites down from the inside. Contrary to what he says, his knowledge is dangerous, so Black Box would split off some of his dumb processes and hide in a comms unit. If anything unsavory happened to Phillips, a lethal injection would be administered to the good doctor before any useful information could be extracted. So Phillips goes down to St. Helios, and he's given a child's room by the elites to stay in, and he sat there for a few minutes until the Arbiter came in to see him. The Arbiter asked him what he wanted to see, and he answered that he wanted to see their most ancient cities and sites, to study the evolution of their language and culture. The Arbiter tells him that he'll have a pilot take him to the safer areas to do this, and then Phillips asks for an arum, which is a small puzzle the elites used for their young to teach patience and discipline. The Arbiter then tells him that he'll have one delivered, and then the Arbiter actually makes a joke. They've put Phillips in a child's room, and now he's basically asking for a child's toy, and so the Arbiter says that the nursery analogy is complete with Phillips. On Phillips' first trip from the keep, he notices a 10 square kilometer area of vitrified soil. Glassing, basically. gleaming in the sunlight. A portion of St. Helios seems to have been glassed, and when he asks his escort about this, the elite tells him that there has been a small civil war happening on St. Helios, which was good news for the team. The team then leaves Phillips on St. Helios and heads to Venezia, where Kilo 39, Mike Spencer, had set up shop, that guy that they rescued from the mines on Rains. Vaz and Mal dress down to try to look like ODST deserters, and then they go to meet Mike Spencer, who picks them up in a warthog. Spencer's cover is that he's an electrician. They head to the city of New Tyne, a bustling metropolis of skyscrapers and highways, not this backwater hideout that they were sort of expecting. They get to Spencer's house and they learn what he's been up to. He has been tracking people, working out who to do business with and who those people do business with, and generally feeling out people with possible insurrectionist ties. While they're learning all of this, Vaz is reading through the files that Spencer had created on all of these people when he freezes on one of them. He closes his eyes in realization of what he just read, and then he breaks the news to Mal and Spencer that they know him. Well, they know of him. They know his daughter very well, Staffan Sinska, who had a daughter named Naomi. Back on St. Helios, Phillips is touring the ruins of Antom, and he has really wowed the elites by showing them that he can solve the Aram puzzles. So they keep bringing him more and more complex Arams, and he just keeps solving them over and over again. Inside the Arams are typically these polished gemstones, but he is given one, and what fell out was not a gemstone, but something else. A message written in English. It says, "Stay off the streets. You are unwise to come here at a time like this. Wait for contact from the sanctuary of the abiding truth, and we will shelter you." Telkem had to have sent this message. Osman is briefed by BB, and they pull Vaz and Mal and head back to St. Helios. Telkem then makes his presence known to Phillips, and the pair walk into a ruin, and Telkem asks Phyllis, I keep saying Phyllis, which is funny because it's not even in the script. Let me pause this. It's not even in the script, but the elites can't say the p. They can't p sound. They can't say that, and so they keep calling Phyllis, and now I'm starting to call him Phyllis. Anyway, Telkem asks Phillips about Jul Mdama, and luckily Phillips plays it cool and asks if he should know who that is. And then there's an explosion. Osman on the Port Stanley, watching this through Phillips's comm unit, hears Telkem say that this wasn't them and that he doesn't know what it was, and then there is another explosion and the video feed died. Phillips woke up with Telkem kneeling over him. He is mostly uninjured. The wind was knocked out of him and he wasn't bleeding much, so he was able to stand up and walk. He realizes that BB wasn't talking to him, so he looked at his comm unit to see that it was littered with shrapnel. He looked around and knows that he's in this Forerunner ruin and that he'll never be able to come back here again, so he may as well catalog everything here. He might as well do what he came here to do in the first place. So he's going about his business. He notices bodies on the ground, many bodies, and a crater that must have been where the bomb was. Now this was a brute terrorist attack. After the war, some brutes elected to work with the elites or work for the elites as laborers. They did the hard jobs that elites didn't want to do or didn't know how to do. So this gave them the unique opportunity to strike the elites at home. As Phillips and Telkem were working this out, plasma fire rained down on them. They both dive for cover, realizing that the brutes weren't finished yet. Phillips wanted to find his pilot and return to Vidam, but Telkem tells him that that wouldn't be a wise decision, and we'll soon find out why. But Phillips already knows why, he just couldn't show it. He then watches as elites, both male and female, surround these brutes and execute them. Now, execute is a very nice way of putting it. What actually happens is they turn into a pack of rabid dogs, and they tear the brutes apart with their claws and their jaws. They literally eat these brutes alive. And this is when Phillips decides that he needs to go. He tries to hightail it back to where he knew his pilot was, or he last saw his pilot, but Telkem pulls him back to the temple. By now, the three ODSTs are leaving Venezia, and Mal and Vaz are arguing over what to do next. They know Naomi's dad is an ONI, which is currently making moves against Earth. They have to tell Osman, but should they tell Naomi first? Vaz wants to tell Naomi first. She trusted him with her file, and he found the link, but Mal thinks Osmond should be the first to know so that she can deal with it, and leave the ODSTs as innocent bystanders in the whole awkward situation. Thankfully, however, when the time comes, Osmond tells the team that there are no secrets in Kilo 5, and with Naomi in the room, she was of the first to hear along with Osmond. Naomi takes the news pretty well at this point. She says that she wasn't even sure that she remembered her father, so not as awkward as they had expected. Back on St. Helios, things have escalated. While the book goes to other points in the galaxy, Phillips is in this room with Telcam and 30 other armored elites that are planning an attack on Vadam, the Arbiter's stronghold. Phillips asks Telcam if he is being held prisoner, or if he is free to leave if he accepts the risks. And after some insults back and forth, Telcam finally tells Phillips that he is not free to go. Now, in my opinion, this isn't in a malicious way. He isn't a prisoner of war or anything like that, but he knows too much. And if he goes to the Arbiter's stronghold, the Arbiter would ask where he had been and who he had been with. Telcam also wanted Osmond to live up to her end of the deal, and having Phillips there was like an insurance policy on that agreement. Telcam then calls Osmond, but they're in slipspace at this point, heading back to St. Helios, and this was before slipspace communications, so the line was just dead. He had to wait until Osmond and the rest of Kilo 5 on Port Stanley dropped out of slipspace to make contact. And he wasn't going to partake in the assault on Vadam, so he decided to again just start studying the Forerunner structure that he was in. The Port Stanley finally drops out of slipspace as the attack on Vadam is sort of kicking off, and Telcam makes contact. He assures Osmond that Phillips is safe and underground, and asks if he can count on Osmond to help in the upcoming battle. But we're told this from the perspective of a female elite named Raya Mdama, Jewel Mdama's wife, who had been searching for him, so we don't hear Osmond's reply. Back in the tunnels, Phillips and BB's fragment, who erased a significant portion of its memory during the attack, are trying to decipher Forerunner runes. They find like symbols for shield worlds, for halos, and another for like a higher being, a better being, or a teacher. Now, Vaz, Mal, Naomi, Black Box, and Devro head down to St. Helios in Tarkart, the Pelican dropship that Devro named. On the way down, Black Box is looking through St. Helios, and he says that he can tell the elites have left a lot to hired help to take care of, and Vaz asks what he means, and he says that he'll show them. Brace, brace, brace. Now, Vaz thinks this is a joke and begins to respond, but is cut off by this explosion. At first, he and Mal thinks that this explosion is real, but BB has just shown them fighting on the ground through their HUD feed, so they're seeing an explosion, but it's not real. Takes them a second to realize. As they are coming down, they see that Vadam is being attacked, and they've been told to go to Antam. As they're landing, they hear gunfire, and when they land, they are greeted by the pilot that the Arbiter actually assigned to Phillips. He tells them where Phillips is, and tells them that the brutes are attacking, and that they're kind of on their own. The elites aren't going to help you. When the team gets there, they notice that the elites are held up inside this almost like castle wall. Heads keep popping up and down, and the team wonders why the elites hadn't just glassed the area. But BB tells them that this is like their Vatican or their Mecca. This is their holy site, and they won't glass it. So Naomi decides to jump into the wall and take out the brutes while the team tries to find another way in. She jumps up onto the wall, and the team is struck by how she basically just takes flight and like a spring flies up there. She takes care of business while the ODSTs start running toward the gate, but the elites start firing on them. Whizzing by their heads are Naomi's bullets, precisely returning fire, and as they close in on the gate, Mal gets hit in the back with plasma. But luckily, after Vaz looks over him, he realizes that the armor took the brunt of it, and he'll be okay. Black Box then uses Naomi's speakers to speak to the elites in St. Heli. The team doesn't understand a word of it, but the elites didn't want them to enter the temple, as they were unbelieving swine, and more elites were coming towards the temple. In other words, trouble was brewing. BB listened in, and the gist of what the elites were worried about was whether or not it was permitted to kill unbelievers on holy ground, or if they had to drag them out to do it. But They wanted to kill them either way, so Naomi charges the gate and forces it closed. After this, the elite that they were talking to finally relented and pointed to the door where Phillips went into. As the team searches the tunnels, Osman in the Port Stanley above St. Helios starts deploying drones around the planet to survey what's happening. And what she is seeing is concerning. The Arbiter has mounted a sizable defense, and Telcam has lost the element of surprise, and in fact, the Arbiter is starting to win. Now, it's important to remember that the mission here, or what the mission here actually is. Kilo 5 is here first and foremost to make the elites cripple each other. And if the Arbiter wins the war in the first day, their mission has been a failure. If Telcam wins in the first day, their mission has failed as well. So they want this long, drawn-out conflict that eats resources and kills as many elites as possible. So the Port Stanley might have to intervene on some way to even those odds. Phillips and Black Box, his damaged fragment at least, wander around the underground Forerunner tunnels, and they come across something interesting. Something that would be really interesting later on, just not in these books. They find that symbol for this great teacher, someone who was unquestionable, didactic, and a warning to stay away from this individual. And as they're studying the panel, Phillips reaches out and he touches the stone, and the symbols about the didactic light up red and blue, then fade away. By now, the rest of the team has started to search the underground tunnels. This place is like a labyrinth, a maze of changing corridors and passageways. Through the sensors on Naomi's armor, however, Black Box is able to pick up Phillips's scent and track his fingerprints. They track him down to a fork, and finally to a door. They open the door, and then they're outside. No Phillips. And at this, the team is starting to get pretty frustrated and pissed off. They just searched this whole maze. They tracked Phillips's fingerprints. They tracked his scent. They opened the door that he should be at, and they're just back outside. They're in this super volatile place at a super volatile time, and they just can't find the doctor, who seemingly vanished into thin air. As they're making plans to search the grounds, the elites charge them, so they run to the ship and bug out. Unbeknownst to the team, Phillips had wandered into a portal and exited somewhere unknown. He didn't know where he was, just that it wasn't Antom anymore. He sees this town way off in the distance, and he decides to just walk there. He figured that he was harmless, and if he showed the elites that he could solve Arams, maybe he could win someone over. But first he comes up to a few grunts, farm workers, basically. They hate the elites, call them bastards, and even talk about the Grunt Rebellion, how their ancestors fought the elites but got glassed for it. The grunts were kind enough to show Phillips to the keep, and on their way there, they notice that banshees are attacking it. Back in orbit, the team is reporting to Osman. Vaz is having his burns treated by Naomi, and he seems to have bruised his ribs jumping into the ship. Black Box, on the other hand, has been able to work out some translation of the Forerunner inscriptions, and the consensus is that they are portal coordinates. Osman continues to monitor the fighting, and news that the Arbiter has allowed humans to drop into St. Helios has spread from keep to keep. This is super important. It's a step too far, basically. Keeps that may have otherwise stayed out of this conflict have picked up arms against the Arbiter, and now he's starting to lose that upper hand that he had earlier on. Phillips is able to make his way to the keep without any further incident, luckily, but what he finds there is super, super interesting. He finds a group of females and children holed up inside of the keep. The males had left the keep to go fight in this new civil war, so why were they being attacked? Well, a rival keep, knowing that the males had left, saw this as easy pickings to conquer their lands. This is very feudal, medieval stuff. But the elites there send word to Telcam about Phillips. This communication is heard by BB, and the team now knows where Phillips is, and so they beeline there. There's some trial and error when it comes to actually finding the right keep. They know the approximate region, the approximate location, but that's about it. But they do, in fact, finally find Phillips, and this is when things get pretty tense between the team and the Doctor. You see, the Doctor sees these aliens as people. They have language and culture and food, and he's witnessing women and children defending their homes. To the team, these are aliens, enemies. They simply don't care about them at all. Whereas Phillips, again, sees people. Phillips tries to reason with the rest of the team, but again, they just don't care about these elites, and they just need to get the doctor and leave. And after some drama where he's trying to convince them to stay and fight, Banshees actually come, and a team sent by Telcam finally, they just grab Phillips and they drag the doctor to the ship to get him out of there. And Phillips is pretty sad by this because he knows that the women and children there will be slaughtered. The team is kind of pissed at him for not bugging out when they told him to, risking all of their lives. And as they're heading back to Port Stanley, they have to stop to make some repairs. A coolant pipe had burst as they were trying to leave that volatile place so quickly. So they stop at a safe place to get to work. And this is when the Infinity drops out of slip space. I hadn't talked about it this far, but the Admiralty decided that the Elite Civil War's first day would be a really fun testing site for their new flagship, which is amazing, but a problem. Again, the team wants this war to last, and the Infinity could end it today. So while the Infinity weakens dissidents, Port Stanley, hanging in orbit undetectable, would weaken the Arbiter's forces. Now, something super interesting about the Port Stanley is that it has the latest stealth technology, and stealth technology has to be infallible. If your own ships can detect stealthy ships when they're trying to be stealthy, well, then the enemy can do so when they capture your ships. So the whole point of having a stealth ship is so that your people can't see you either. So the Infinity can't see the Port Stanley. Now, the team on the ground is approached by the dropship that was sent by Telcam that I mentioned earlier, and inside it are two elites named Forze Mdama and Raya Mdama, Jules' friend and his wife, respectively. They argue with the team for a bit about Phillips and what to do with him. They've been told to take him and bring him back to Telcam, and the team tries to convince them that Telcam was just going to give the doctor back to them anyway, so we're just cutting out the middleman. Raya goes back to the ship to confirm this via radio with Telcam, and comes back to tell Forze that it's true, and that Telcam has asked them to assist in repairs. Luckily, the elites had the right size of tubing for the coolant lines that the team needed, and the team was able to finally get off of St. Helios. Back on the Stanley, a Pelican from the Infinity had landed in the shuttle bay. Inside of it was the Admiral of ONI, crystallized ginger, and 2 Huragok. Requires adjustment or adj, and leaks repaired or leaks. Now, Adj had been with the team before. This was the engineer that they rescued from the Brutes earlier in this video, but Leaks was a newcomer to the ship and the team. So Adj gives him this really fun little rundown of the team. He says that Mal feeds them, Vaz is fast enough to catch them and trap them, BB is impatient but clear thinking, Naomi doesn't allow them to access her armor, Devro and Osmond don't interfere with them, and Phillips will try to engage in long intellectual conversations with them. Which I just love that description of the team from an engineer's perspective. Once Osmond gets back to the bridge, she radios Telcam. She tells him that things are about to happen that she can't stop. The Infinity attacking his people. She tells him that she'll try to even the odds for him, her blowing up the Arbiter's forces, and she also tells him to look above the planet. He does this and he's shocked by what he sees, this 6-kilometer long ship. The largest ship that he'd ever seen and anyone had ever seen. By now the team is in space and marveling over the Infinity. Phillips had taken off his helmet to view it through the cockpit window, and this is when a small explosion rocks the ship. Vaz jumped in and threw Phillips his helmet on. He throws Phillips' helmet on and sealed it. And Phillips is shocked at how close he had just come to the end. Many times over the last few days. Phillips just sits there in place. Now, unfortunately, the makeshift repair that they did on the ground had blown, and Phillips is sitting there, and then all of a sudden he explodes with excitement, saying that this had been the best week of his life. He was juiced with adrenaline and the experiences that he would never have had back at the university. The team is able to get towed back to the Infinity, and they make their way to the bridge, and they watch as the Infinity helps the Arbiter. It was super awkward, or kind of funny, maybe, but the ODSTs and Phillips are on the bridge of this amazing ship with 2 admirals, the Commander-in-Chief of the Fleet, Lord Hood, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Office of Naval Intelligence, Margaret Parangoski, and they watch as this ship starts attacking Vadam's outer walls. And and the Arbiter's ships hadn't arrived to help yet. So Lord Hood asks the Arbiter if he wanted the Infinity to drop it, and finally, after a little back and forth, he finally said yes. 60 missiles were shot from the Infinity. The Ex-Covenant returned fire, but those missiles from the Covenant ship never even made it through the Infinity's defenses. The Infinity then fired 2 more missile pods, and the Defender of Faith comes down. The Infinity then shoots a Mac round into the ground, creating this huge explosion and crater, wiping the Arbiter's front lawn off the map, but also destroying an invading army. While all of this is going down, Osman was arguing with Telcam, trying to get him out of harm's way. Again, this team wants this war to go on as long as possible, so they need Telcam to leave. Finally, Osman is able to get Telcam to leave, but the team has to go collect him. So they hightail it back to Tarkart, which had been repaired and even upgraded by the Huragok on the Infinity. They drop to the ground in the middle of this firefight. They make their way to Telcam as fast as they can, but Telcam didn't want to come. He didn't want to run from a fight. That's a great dishonor to elites. So they send in Naomi. They hear this cussing and saying Healy and the word demon and some bangs. Naomi finally asks for a hand, and Mal goes in to see Naomi holding down the Fieldmaster, and they restrain him, bring him back to Tarkart, and the team then takes him to New Linelli. Now, they're able to do that because while they were on the Infinity, the Huragok hooked up Tarkart with FTL drives. So Port Stanley is above Sanghelios with Black Box and Osman on board, while the team is able to jump in slipspace via Tarkart, their Pelican. Now on the Port Stanley, it's really just Black Box and Osman, and the pair of them, really just Black Box, blow up 3 of the Arbiter's cruisers, and it gives Osman pause. In fact, she's hesitant to do it. As an ONI operative, she has worked to undermine the fleet's goals, Hood's goals, for a long time. But when it comes to blowing up 3 allied ships, it felt a lot more real, a lot more like war. After blowing up those ships, she went to the Infinity and spoke with Lord Hood. Now, Osman had blown up those 3 ships posing as a Kig-Yar mercenary ship. Remember, Infinity couldn't see them. So she was tasked with finding it, and when she comes face to face with Hood, he asks about the Jackals and whether or not she had destroyed the ship, and Osman does something that she's done a few times thus far. She doesn't exactly lie, but she kind of skirts around the question, and she says that the Jackals won't be a problem anymore, which is technically true, because they were never a problem. There weren't any Jackals there in the first place. To the resident AI expert on the Infinity, Dr. Halsey. They wanted to see if she could help Black Box reintegrate his damaged fragment, or just let him forget about it. Let him forget that it was ever there. Unfortunately, however, she was no help, so Black Box just sort of had to grit his teeth and let the damaged fragment in. Back on the Port Stanley, the Huragok upgrades are getting pretty weird. They were able to turn an entire deck transparent. Leaks modified the hull at a molecular level to create a transparent metal. The team then gets to work cataloging all of the symbols that Black Box and Phillips recorded in the tunnels of Ontom. And Devereaux makes a pretty solid point here. She realizes that there is a negative symbol, like don't, or must not, or do not. And the only time this symbol is in the entire system is just before it talks about the teacher, or lecturer, or didact. Now, if you've watched my video on the biography of the didact, you'd know that the didact was once a professor at a war college on a planet called Numdogro, and his students nicknamed him the didact. After talking about this, Phillips then asks for some satellite imagery of a place. They assume Ontom, but he says no, Necroli. This is where the portal dropped him off, where those female elites and child elites were fighting against a rival keep that invaded when all the males left, where Phillips tried to get the team to stay and fight, but they forced him to leave. After a few minutes, he got the images, but they didn't paint a clear picture, but luckily, the Arbiter made inquiries as well, and the clan Phillips was in was gone. They were all killed. Finally, after nearly an entire book, the team leaves Sanghelios. They drop Phillips off on Onyx, where he speaks with Jul 'Mdama. He thinks that there is some link between Forerunner languages and Elite languages, and if they can find that link, they can break the Forerunner language altogether. Unfortunately, as he's explaining this, and speaking to Jul, he gets a message on his datapad and he has to leave. And the reason he has to leave is because the team heads back to Venezia to work with Mike Spencer. This time they weren't there to just observe. This time they're going to look for a particular threat to Earth, the Pious Inquisitor. The plan was that Vaz and Naomi would make landfall first, and a few days later Mal would join them. But before they do this, they look over a mantis, for some reason. They have one now. It's never used, it's never mentioned again. I don't know why this is included in the book, but they just talk about a mantis. Anyway, Vaz and Naomi go to the surface of Venezia, and likely for the first time in 40 years, Naomi is on the same planet as her father. They make contact with Spencer, and he tells them how to get started, how to make contacts, to sell some things for cash. Since Venezia isn't connected to human banking in any way, they need to get some cash right up front. So they take a rifle down to the local bar to sell for some cash. And the guy that they sold it to recognized Naomi. The guy could swear that he had seen her somewhere, but of course he hadn't, as she had never been to this planet. But he had seen her father, and on the way from the bar they even see him, her father. They're walking back, and they see this box truck. And then the driver's side is Naomi's father, Staffan Sinska, and he's driving with a jackal named Sav Fel, the jackal that took a ship called the Pious Inquisitor from the elites. Now, the Pious Inquisitor has a pretty crazy history. This ship attacked Earth as part of Regret's fleet in Halo 2. It survived the battle for Earth and was in the hands of the Brutes when the Great Schism broke out. During the Great Schism, it was seized by the elites led by Urtas Vadum and was brought to High Charity to help cleanse it of the flood and stop the flood from spreading. It followed the flood-infested ship that crashed on Earth and participated in the glassing of East Africa. It was also one of the ships that the elites took to the Ark to finally finish the Covenant. It returned to St. Helios after the battle, and from here it was stolen by Telcam, who entrusted the ship to Sav Fel. And that would be one of his biggest mistakes. Sav took the ship and stashed it away, and then fled the elites to wind up on Venezia. Now, even without all of that history, you have played on this ship because it is also the ship that the multiplayer map Midship in Halo 2 is on, and Heretic in Halo 3. Isn't that cool? Without the history, you've played on that ship. Now, while Vaz and Naomi were on the ground, the rest of the team was in space. Mal, Blackbox, and Devro oversaw the engineers baking a cake, while Phillips moped about the elites that got slaughtered, feeling as if he could have helped them in some way. The team was baking a cake because today was promotion day. Today, something called the List made its rounds. It announced which officers were getting promoted and which ones were to be left in the same rank for the next year, or even forever. Osman was now Rear Admiral Serin Osman, heir to the ONI throne. They presented it to Osman, who received the cake with a smile and decided to divide the cake into 8 pieces. Now, this is somewhat significant. 1 captain, 4 soldiers, 1 civilian professor, and 2 Huragok. Symbolically, it's like she is counting the engineers as equal parts of the crew while also saving 2 pieces for Naomi and Vaz, who are planetside right now, which I really love that detail. Back on the ground, Naomi is going through a bit of a crisis. She just saw her father for the first time in nearly 40 years. She looks like him. What should she call him? Father, Sinska, Dad. Everything that she does feels wrong to her, but subconsciously, she starts calling him Dad. She's 2 days into this operation and is already putting everyone, including herself, in an awkward position. Nobody had trained for this, least of all Spartans. While they're going over this, they head back to Spencer's place. They decide that they need to tail Sav Fel, maybe even Staffan, and they finally call all of this into Osman. Osman decides that she never should have put Naomi in this position in the first place. She's a Spartan, right? But Spartans aren't always automatically the best fit for a job, especially a job like this. She may have been able to deploy in an undercover capacity in a massive city like Sydney or New Mombasa, where a 6 to 7 foot tall woman might not be uncommon. I mean, it would be uncommon, but it's within the realm of possibility. And New Time isn't a small town by any means, but it is small town suspicious. They care about who comes and goes, and they keep tabs on everyone. She's already been noticed or recognized, and so Osman decides to pull her out and replace her with Mal. But in the meantime, Vaz and Naomi headed to a local bar to try to make contacts. They watch Jackals drink, and they have some snacks, and then a guy gets up and starts talking to Naomi, a guy named Serin. They talk about Jackals, what Jackals want, how their society works. He then shifts gears and asks if they're new in town, if they're ex-UNSC, and he tries to recruit them to the Venezian militia. He pays for their drinks and tells them to come to the barracks when they're ready to join. They then do something totally inadvisable. They go to Staffan's house, they find a quiet place to sit, and they just watch the house. She sees Staffan's son, Edvin, Naomi's half-brother. She sees Staffan's granddaughter, Edvin's daughter, and Naomi's niece, as well as Staffan himself. They shouldn't have done that. Shortly after this, Naomi is picked up and Mal is dropped off. The team not on the ground then headed back to New Lanelli to drop off more weapons to Telcam. Not only did they give him more weapons, but Phillips also handed over handwritten translations of the Forerunner symbols he recorded under Ontom, which Telcam sort of treats like a Bible or some holy text. A few days later, Mal and Vaz are back in a bar where Vaz and Naomi met Serin. They're there to introduce Mal to Serin. He was the new guy on the block. He had never been there before. Actually, he had, but they didn't know that. And Serin asks them a couple simple questions. What are your skills? Do you have any experience with ships, big ships? Serin also asks about Naomi, where she had gone. And Mal plays it safe by saying that he never asks too many questions when those two are concerned, meaning Vaz and Naomi. After some more chatting, Serin tells them to report to the barracks the next day. On the way back home, however, they get stopped by some Jackals. At first, they're nervous about that old Mav Oot I talked about probably like an hour ago, that was placed on them back on Reigns, but the Jackals just wanted to buy their weapons from them. So finally, they go back to Mike Spencer's house. They use the next day to rehearse what they're going to say to any given question, and then, when the time came, they went to the barracks. Here they're put through a series of tests just to make sure they are truly ex-UNSC, but not before something rattles them. They see the guy that Vaz sold the rifle to earlier on, and the guy comes up to him and he says, "Hey, where's that girl that looks like Staffan Sinska?" What? This rattled the ODSTs, but they played it cool. By this time, the good folks of Venezia hadn't told them about Staffan yet, who he was, and so they weren't supposed to know who he was. So to deflect, Vaz asks who Staffan was, to which the man, named Gareth, by the way, answers that he's an arms dealer. From here, they are put through those tests that I mentioned a second ago. They worked through both human and Covenant weapons, firing both prone and standing, and finally they were convinced of the ODSC's competency. They were added to the payroll, given comms units, and given a schedule of working 2 days a week and being responsible to come in case of an emergency. And I think this is where I should pause. During the last few days, Staffan had been very busy. He had been out to look over the Pious Inquisitor, test its ventral beam, and talk to its Huragog. He also purchased the ship. He traded fighters and dropships to Sav Fel for the battlecruiser. He now had this instrument for answers. This put him a step above your run-of-the-mill INI. With this ship, he could force the UNSC to finally tell him what happened to his little girl. The one who sold the ship, Sav Fel, was strutting around New Time as proud as ever, which led Spencer to come to the conclusion that he may have come to some new wealth. And if that was the case, there was only one way he got it, and there could only be one buyer. So, with this new information, the ODSTs call in to Osmond. They report that they're in with the Innies, and the Pious Inquisitor was probably now in Staffan's hands, and that he had renamed it to Naomi. They spend the next day around town looking like Marines trying to start a new life. The next day, they reported to the barracks to set up some training exercises for the guys that weren't trained soldiers within the militia. They do some drills to make it look like they were serious about their jobs, but wouldn't actually make Venezia like a seriously strong military fighting force. As they were drawing up these plans, the door opens, and in walks Naomi's father, Staffan. For the first time after weeks of studying and learning that he was Naomi's father, they meet face to face. They make the proper introductions, and what strikes them is that this apparent anti-Earth mastermind that spent the better part of 30 years planning against their home planet was just this normal guy, this grandpa, basically. He asks them about UNSC procedures for Covenant bombardment. He asks if they wanted to see his new project, a Covenant ship. He gestures towards the door and he says, come on, let's go see the good ship Naomi. They're taken to an airfield and they're strapped into a Calypso dropship, which is a dropship that has a slipspace drive. And they talk to Staffen and his son on the way to the ship. They talk about their fictional desertion, the war, the Pious Inquisitor. They're having this conversation. And as they're having this conversation, they think that this is almost too good to be true. They expected to work on Venezia for months, working into Venezian society just to get a chance to locate the ship, and now on their second day, or really their first day, Staffen is bringing them straight to the ship. Finally, they see the ship, and they ask Staffen why he renamed it Naomi, and Staffen told them what they already knew. It was named after his daughter, who was abducted. And note that Staffen didn't tell them about the clone. They get on the ship and they talk about its history, things that any Marine on Earth would have known about it. Then Staffen introduces them to sometimes Sinks, an engineer that came with the ship, so to speak. And something kind of funny happens here. Staffen asks if they know anything about engineers and if they eat anything. And they explain that they eat this yeasty sludge. Of course, the ODSTs would know this intimately as they fed Adge and Sinks, or Leaks. And so they offer, hey, we can make some if you want to, and Staffen gets super worried like a grandfather, and he thinks Sinks must be starving, and he offers him some candy that was in his pocket. And the ODSTs wish they didn't do that. Because, much like their first meeting just a few hours ago, it was hard to imagine that this old guy was planning to move against Earth with a Covenant battleship. You see him feed his pet with candy from his pocket, and it humanizes him. And we have to remember that, for the most part, the ODSTs really only ever fought aliens. The war started before they were even born. And so now they have to fight humans, and they don't know what it's like to fight humans, and they're seeing this grandpa feed his pet with candy. It's hard to see him as an enemy. Osmond called them somewhere in space while they were on the Pious Inquisitor, and so they don't answer. So Osmond starts to get pretty worried. The ODSTs had missed 2 radio check-ins, and if they missed a third, Naomi would be forced to deploy to save them. She asks Spencer if he knew anything about them or what they had been up to, and he just responds that it was their first day working for the militia and that they're probably busy. As she's sitting in space being super anxious about this, she reads a ship exiting slipspace and she watches it land, and after about another hour, the guys check in. They report everything. Staffen took them to the Pious Inquisitor, that it had an engineer, and why it had been renamed. They also have Black Box jump a fragment into their comms unit. That way, if they get on the ship again, he can get into it and move it without Staffen ever knowing. Now, with Mal's radio and Vaz's location data, BB makes a critical mistake. He tries to infiltrate the ship, overload its computers, and take control of the vessel. He tried, but was slapped away. He tried again and is hit again. This had never happened to him, and it's frustrating to him. He just couldn't get into the ship's systems. The engineer blocked him out and cut him off. The next plan was to get BB onto a data chip and physically plug him into the ship. Now, like I said, this was a huge blunder. Sinks told Staffen. Staffen investigated who he thought it could have been trying to take his ship. It actually was Staffen's son, Edvin, that tells Staffen that it may have been their new Marines. The timing was just far too suspicious. 2 guys show up in town at the exact moment that Staffen needed them, with the exact knowledge that Staffen needed. He lets them on the ship, and then there was an attempted breach. Mal and Vaz were spending the evening at the bar when Staffen and Edvin arrived. They talk about the jackal that sold the ship to Staffen, how he had gone missing, he had been kidnapped, which we'll talk about here in a little bit when we get there. Vaz suggests that whoever took Sav could get to the ship if Sav knew where the ship was, so they needed to move it. And they offered to help. But before they got to the truck, they get jumped. A box truck came up behind them, and they got shocked with a taser or something of the sort, and they were dragged into the truck. Now, the guys saw this coming. Mal told BB to bug out, so BB clears himself of the comms unit and reported to Osmond that they'd been taken, and he also warns Spencer. Now, the problem here isn't really that they've been taken. The team has a Spartan. They'll be fine. The problem, really, is that the Spartan isn't around. Naomi and Devro took Tarkart out of system to pick up another dropship and some other items from an orbital platform. So they had to cut in line, flash their ONI badges. Back on Venezia, the ODSTs were split up. Vaz was tied to a metal chair in a room somewhere. He wasn't quite sure where he was, but he thought he was on the militia base. That made sense to him. He wasn't sure if they'd actually been found out or if this was routine for newcomers, and that's when Nairn and Staffen walk in. Staffen took a seat across from Vaz, and Nairn hit Vaz in the face hard. They talked for a while. Staffen speculates that the ODSTs may still be on UNSC payroll, or maybe just wanted the ship for themselves. Staffen got up and left to go get Mal, and Nairn started beating the piss out of Vaz. Almost literally. Vaz pisses himself. Now, this wasn't so much from the beating, but more because they had just been at the bar for a night of drinking, and the man just really had to piss. Nairn asked about the woman that came with him initially, and about Spencer, who bugged out when BB warned him, but got no answers. Nairn continued to beat Vaz, but Vaz had been through anti-interrogation training before. ODSTs dropped behind enemy lines, and the odds of them being taken hostage were pretty good. Maybe not against the Covenant, who didn't typically take prisoners, but still, the training was mandatory for them, and Vaz thought that the beating really wasn't all that bad. No psychological stuff, no blades, no plastic bags over the head, just really kicks. And then Vaz thought about something. The UNSC and ONI could just blow up the Pious Inquisitor. They didn't need the ship. It would have been great to have it, but they didn't need it. But Vaz needed Mal. Mal was his brother. And so he literally says, "I'm sorry, Admiral, but Mal comes first." And he started talking about Naomi. He asks Nairn if he believes Staffen, if he believes that his daughter was taken and replaced with a clone. But remember, Staffen didn't mention the clone when he told them his story. So he shouldn't have known about that. So Vaz makes a play for Mal. He says that he wants to see Mal alive and well. Mal was being interrogated by Gareth. Now, there's a steel table in front of him, and he's getting his head dropped into it like that scene in The Dark Knight. He also didn't know where he was, and Gareth seemed very interested in Mal's neural transponder. Mal gave him a bit of information, and Gareth grabbed a hand drill, probably just to psych out Mal, but Mal decided he was going to fight back. Mal was just tied with his hands behind his back, while Vaz was physically, tied to the chair that he was in. This locked Vaz in place, but Mal had options. So he sprang up and headbutted Gareth. They both fell to the floor, inches from each other's faces. Gareth raised his arm to cry for help, and Mal takes a bite into his arm, sinking his teeth deep into Gareth's flesh. He tasted blood. He locked his jaw, clamping down as hard as he could, refusing to let go. In Mal's head, he's mocking Gareth, calling him a dickhead and an amateur for letting this happen. Someone grabs Mal's hair and forces him to get off, and Gareth freaks out. Nairn was the one to pull Mal off. Staffen walked into the door and stood there in disbelief, looking at this bloody mess. Finally, he shoved Vaz through the door, showing both of them that the other was alive. Both of them are pretty beat up, but they both think that it's worse to see the other in such a state. They can take pain on themselves, but seeing their brother like that really, really affects them. Staffen orders Nairn and Gareth out of the room, then pulls in chairs for the ODSTs and himself to sit in. He starts by talking to Vaz. He says that Vaz is right on the edge of what a smart guy could guess, given the information Staffen had already given him, and what a UNSC or ONI insider would know for a fact. And he had his pistol out at this point and tells Vaz that he has a few minutes to level with Staffen or he'll shoot Mal. It's a perfect play. They can deal with or even accept death and pain on their own, but to cause pain or death to their brother was unthinkable. So Vaz had to convince Staffen that he was telling the truth. So he says that you picked up your daughter from the New Stockholm Hospital. The doctor's name was Dr. Kelvin. Staffen tried to coax Val on, and that's when Edvin bursts into the room, pleading with his father to not be tortured anymore. Vaz asks, basically, would I know what Naomi asked for after her abduction if not for the files? An egg sandwich with dill, and she wanted a doll's house. This is information that only Staffen would know about. He would only know that that was her favorite sandwich. He would only know that before she was abducted, she wanted a doll's house. So Staffen grabs Edvin's arm and told him to leave. After some more back and forth, Staffen asks the big question, why my kid? And Vaz answered, because she was one in billions, and Earth needed her. Staffen then questioned him on the past tense way that he answered these questions. He's basically asking if she's still alive, and this is when Vaz made his move. He told Staffen that it was clear, based on what he said, that he and Mal know more about the situation than anyone else on this planet did, but not everything can be beaten out of them. This is a brilliant move. These two ODSTs are now the most valuable assets on the planet, and Staffen couldn't kill them. Staffen asks if they're there to finally hunt him down, and Vaz tells him that their mission really had nothing to do with him. He just got in the way. They were looking for the Pious Inquisitor. If you didn't buy it, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So Staffen takes off, leaving the ODSTs alone in the room. They then start conversating with each other through lip reading. They had gotten pretty good at lip reading since it was really the only way to communicate without Black Box hearing them on the ship. They ask each other about injuries, where they think they are, that sort of thing. Above them, in orbit, Osman and BB are using the Port Stanley's array of Forerunner surveillance technology to literally comb the city for the ODSTs. With this new technology they found on Onyx and the engineers, the Port Stanley can create a live map of the city, complete with interiors that she can go through at the hologram table. Leaks was also working with her to create a neural transponder locator. Now, Osman is working really hard here, but she's also beating herself up over all of this. She should have upgraded everyone's neural transponder when Phillips went missing. She shouldn't have sent off Naomi. She should have had the ODSTs trained in undercover work more. Should have done this. Should have done that. Both BB and Phillips try to soothe her, but she seems to be the sort of person that has to talk through her problems. She comms with Devro and Naomi, who now have the 2 slipspace-capable dropships, and this sort of plan is laid. Osman would take the Stanley to go take on the Pious Inquisitor, who Chol Vaughn is now boarding, which we'll talk about. Naomi and Dev would extract Vaz and Mal, and then jump to Stanley. As they're working out this, a data transmission from Spencer is received stating that he bugged out of the city and is awaiting retrieval. Right after this, Black Box is able to locate Mal and Vaz. They're able to see Mal walking around a room while Vaz is sitting still. Back on the ground, it had been a little while since Staffen left the ODSTs in this room, but he comes back with one guy that participated in the abduction, but not the interrogations, a guy named Sol. Staffen comes in and tells them that it's just the 4 of them in the facility now, and if they wanted to cut a deal, it would have to be a damn good one. Vaz pleads for safe passage out, but Staffen just starts asking questions. Is my daughter alive? How do you know all of this stuff? Are you higher value than we thought? And Vaz only answered the one question, she's still alive. Staffen then asks if she remembers him, to which Vaz says no. And Staffen then puts his gun away. And he tells the ODSTs that if they had been stringing him along, they'd probably have told him something he wanted to hear, and then he left. Again. A few minutes later, Staffen came back and took Vaz to go clean up. Then, a while after that, Sol came and got Mal to clean up. He was able to take a leak and get some water, clean up his blood a bit, but Sol was keeping him company. He also told Mal that Vaz had been taken by Staffen to somewhere safe from Edvin. Mal starts looking around the room, and Sol tells him not to try anything. And Mal responds that he's just playing I Spy to pass the time. And Mal hears something groan. The stress of the supporting structure of the ceiling above him. There's only one thing that could be, so he says, I spy with my little eye something that starts with S. And at that moment, a half-ton of Mjolnir-clad Spartan drops through the ceiling. Naomi had come to save him. Sol only had time to raise his pistol before a bullet entered his chest and another entered his skull. Mal jumped up and said, S for Spartan. I win. Naomi cut his restraints and handed him a magnum, and she asks if he can make it through the hole that she just created above them, and so he grabs a chair to boost himself up, and she just grabs him. She says, oh no, we don't do that. She grabs Mal and uses a jetpack to fly out of the building. They hit the ground with a thud in front of a pelican, and with Naomi sort of leaning over him because it's an awkward landing, and he reaches up and grabs her helmet and plants a big ol' bloody kiss on her visor and then they get on the Pelican and they lift off. Now, Vaz had been taken by Staffen to an old mine. They talk a little bit about morality, the Covenant, the insurrectionists, and Vaz tells him that he knows his daughter, but meeting her will be extremely painful. Then Staffen receives a radio transmission. Nairn told Staffen that Sol is dead. The armory was hit, and Mal was gone. Someone had come straight through the roof and back out. They think that it might be Mike Amberley, otherwise known as Mike Spencer, but he had just been hiding in a field somewhere. They didn't know that a Spartan was planetside. Vaz hears this, and he starts pleading with Staffen. He says they only have a short time to finish this conversation. Staffen puts a gun to Vaz's head, and Vaz starts talking. Don't open fire, or you'll be killed. If you want to see her again, put your gun away. Then they hear an engine whine and a thud, then something at the door. Vaz still pleads with Staffen to get down, but he doesn't, and so Vaz just shoves him to the ground and steps in front of him. The door flies into the room, and Dev walks into the room and looks at Staffen and just goes, "Oh, that's freaky," realizing just how much he looked like Naomi. Vaz and Dev take Staffen and load him onto the ship, and they fly away. Now, Osmond doesn't want Naomi to see her father. Not like this, at least. And no matter how she phrases it, it sounds bad in her head. She radioed Devro and told her to get the prisoner stowed away before Naomi disembarks. The two Pelicans get inside the ship, and then they jump into slip space. She goes down to see Vaz, and he has a swollen eye that had been so swollen that it's closed up, and he had a broken split lip, and she was furious that someone had dared lay a finger on one of her men, and she ordered him to go to the med bay and get patched up. She then introduces herself to Staffen and takes him to a cell. She then heads to the med bay to check on the ODSTs, and they're pretty beat up. They're beat to hell and back. But the news is mostly good. No organ damage, no brain damage, just a broken nose from Mal probably being smacked onto the table or the headbutt that he did, and then some cuts and some bruising. And she asks if they gave up anything, and Vaz tells her, and I might add that he's very disappointed in himself for telling him this. That he told Staffen more than he needed to know, that Naomi had been abducted, is alive, and that she had saved him a time or two. Osmond then asks Naomi if she wanted to meet her father, then meets up with Staffen herself. This is an awkward time, and he simply asks that if they're going to kill him, at least let his family know so they don't spend a lifetime trying to find him like he did with Naomi. Osmond tells him that she is very sorry, tells him about how she was abducted too, and that both her and Naomi were trained together to become Spartans, and she gives him some information about the Spartan program, about how she had to drop out, but Naomi completed the program, and for the last 30 years has been a frontline commando. Staffen then asks about Arthur. Arthur's dad was a man named Andy Remo, and was sort of a criminal mentor for Staffen, and Staffen promised him that he would find answers when Remo was dying. And as we know, Arthur was killed trying to save Halsey from the Covenant. For more than an hour after that, Staffen just sat, unmoving and silent. Now, the ship drops out of slip space, but they don't see the Covenant battlecruiser that they were expecting, but a Covenant missionary ship. And Covenant missionary ships were typically Jackal ships, Kegyar ships. And this is when I need to pause and talk about the Jackals. After the Pious Inquisitor went missing, the Bishop, Avumed Telkam, hired another Jackal to go find the ship. This Jackal was named Chol Vaughn. She went throughout the galaxy finding different leads to the ship. Now, she was hired by Telkam to find the ship and report back its location, but Chol was an interesting Jackal. She went against the grain of the typical Jackal and believed that a central government and a strong navy would be a good thing for the mostly feudal species. So she had no plans to actually return the ship to Telkam or report back its location. She wanted to take it back home and start that strong navy that I just mentioned. So she tracked down Sav Fel, took him as hostage, bringing him back to her ship, Paragon, in order to have him bring her and her crew to the Pious Inquisitor. And he did just that. She and 15 other Jackals went into the Inquisitor, alerting Sinks, who followed Staffen's orders and sent the ship into slip space to a predetermined location. So now the Jackals, still on Paragon, have lost the ship since Sinks has moved it via slipspace, and they jump right in front of Port Stanley, and the assumption is to follow it, or so the team thinks. Now the team has to figure out where the Pious Inquisitor has gone, and the only one who would know that is already right there on the ship, and has a price. His price was to see his daughter again. And so the door opens, and Naomi walks in. And she actually apologizes to her father. She always had this feeling that if she didn't do something wrong, then Halsey's team would have never been able to find her. And so she has had this guilt for decades, even though she doesn't remember what that thing was. Staffen took her hands and wept over the daughter that he refused to believe was dead. The father and daughter then go into a private room to speak alone. However, BB is asked by Naomi to listen in and pick up on any clue on where the Pious Inquisitor may have been taken. And as he's listening, he realizes that somewhere deep within him is this need to set everything right for Naomi, and possibly for all the Spartans. This could be a hint at his brain donor, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Staffen sees Naomi's scars and asks about them, and she explains the augmentations and their side effects. He then asks his daughter if she has, or if she ever could have, a normal life, if she's happy, and she says that she's a Spartan. She explains that she had side effects from the augmentations, and that she has no drive to reproduce, to have a family, or to settle down, and this greatly and justifiably angers her father. He talks about how they took her, how they turned her into their machine, and then neutered her like some farm animal. And it's important here to mention that these side effects weren't across the board, nor were they intended. Naomi experienced them, but not every Spartan did. Halsey knew that the effects were possible, but none of the augmentations purposely sterilize the Spartans or reduce sex drives. But, they have altered hormones, and of course that was a possible side effect. Naomi tells her father that she's okay with what happened, that she was where she needed to be when she needed to be there, that she made a difference throughout the war, and that most people never got to make a difference. Staffen then asks about the Covenant. Naomi was taken in 2516, and the Covenant didn't show up until 2525, and Naomi had to drop the ball that they were made for the insurrectionists, not the Covenant. Naomi took a break and went to talk to Black Box. She asks him to plug into her brain to see if he can unlock forgotten memories. As they're having this conversation, Staffen calls out, and he says he wanted to speak to the Admiral, so Osman joins them. Staffen says that he has decided his price, his daughter for the ship. If the UNSC could let Naomi go back to her family, he'd give Osman the location of the ship. And Osman tells Staffen that nobody owns Naomi, and nobody can stop her from putting in her resignation papers just like anyone else in the UNSC. Naomi then tells Osman that she also has a condition. Before she decides on what to do, she wanted to remember her childhood as best she could. That way she knows she's making the most informed decision. So they split up. Osman goes back to the bridge, and Naomi takes Black Box to go remember her past. He plugs into her brain and starts unlocking those memories. She remembers a day at the fair with her mother and father, and a donut she had, a dollhouse and a store window. She tastes medicine given to her by Halsey's doctors. She remembers being dragged in a car and being sedated. She woke up and fought back. She actually escaped, running into the woods. She didn't have any clothing. She didn't have any shoes. She was running into the woods, and she hid in this tall grass in a river until someone, whoever it was that was chasing her, used thermal to find her and drag her back. She remembers seeing a light, getting off the bus early to figure out what that light was, falling in the mud, and then being grabbed. She remembers her first days on Reach, clinging to the other children for comfort and support, and Halsey telling her that Daddy isn't coming for her, and that her father and her mother had even signed off on the Spartan program. Now, I told you that out of order, chronological order or whatever, the order that it actually happened, because that's how we are shown it in the book. So what happened was Naomi was riding the bus back from school. She sees a light. She wants to figure out what the light is. It couldn't be a star. It's moving. It's probably a dropship, and so she gets off the bus early to go figure it out. She gets snatched and sedated. Her clothes are taken off. I think they put other clothes on her, probably just to make it look like she's not, make her unrecognizable. She wakes up, she fights back, she gets out of the car, she runs into the woods, and that's when she hides in that river in the tall grass. The ONI team uses thermal to find her and take her. So that's how it played out. This whole thing skews her entire perception of the program. She didn't feel chosen. She felt abused. But now isn't the time for all that, but she knew what she had to go tell her father now. But as this was happening, the team got a call from Staffan's radio. The Huragok that moved the ship, sometimes sinks, when the Jackals attacked it, was calling in to ask what to do next, and Black Box was able to track that signal to its source and find the ship's location, which really pissed off Staffan. He had a chance, but now they don't need his information. He went back to his cell, and the team went to plan what to do next. They have to get the Inquisitor, and they have to get Black Box onto the ship physically, and possibly kill Sometimes Sink so that he can't interfere. And they make their plan and jump into slip space. Naomi goes back to talk to Staffan again, and she tells him a little bit about Halsey. He tells her a little bit about the family back on Venezia. She talks about not remembering so much that she now did, and how the children were told that their parents knew of their abduction and even signed off on it. They talk about the clone, about how Staffan knew it wasn't Naomi, but loved her as if she was his anyway. Both to cope with the fact that he lost his real daughter, but also because the clone deserved the love of a father just like anyone else. This sad, sick, dying girl deserved the kindness and compassion of a father, which I think is something we should pause and talk about. The clones are almost portrayed as an afterthought a lot of the time. But they were people, with thoughts and feelings and emotions. And not only were 75 children abducted, but 75 children, most of the 75 children, were basically given this death sentence. To die these horrible deaths in place of the person that was abducted, which I think is important to think about. It wasn't only 75 children, it was 150 children, when you really think about it, that were drastically affected by this program. Naomi left to get ready for the mission, and a few moments later the ship dropped out of slip space. Mal went to grab Staffan and brought him to the bridge, where he saw the crew all suited up, including Naomi in her blue Mjolnir armor. They see the Pious Inquisitor alone in space, meaning the missionary ship hadn't come, or hadn't been able to follow it, like they assumed that it did when it jumped into slip space in front of them. Staffan was able to contact Sinks, and Sinks told Staffan that he needed to see Staffan in order to trust that it actually was him, and instructed Staffan to enter the ship alone. But Staffan says that he needs a pilot, and so he chooses Vaz. Sinks had seen Vaz before, so he should be at least somewhat familiar with him. The two of them leave, and the rest get ready to board the ship if anything goes wrong. Once Vaz and Staffan are alone in their dropship, Staffan grabs Vaz's arm, and he pleads with the Russian to look over his daughter. He says that if Vaz looks after Naomi for him, he'll cease all insurgent activity. And the two of them give each other their words. This is very important. This is a promise that they give to each other, and this promise is immensely important to remember. It takes a bit for Sinks to finally let them into the ship, but he finally does. Once they board, Vaz surveys the area, seeing some dead jackal bodies, and he's looking for a terminal. He has Black Box on a chip. Sinks came and found Vaz and Staffan, and he tells them that the jackals are between them and the bridge. Sinks brought Staffan to an address system, and while Staffan talked to Trolvan, who was surprised that a human was on the ship, Vaz found a data port and stuck BB inside. The conversation between Staffan and Trolvan was cut short, though, when Sinks realized what happened and got upset, saying like, you lied to me, you tricked me. But it was too late. Black Box was in, and he cut off all streams of incoming data and secured himself on the bridge. So Sinks couldn't stop Black Box, like, in data-wise, so he just started ripping apart the ship. He started physically cutting power lines, which was something that Black Box had no way of stopping. With that, Staffan gets a bit more confident, and he asks if he really thought he'd let Oni disappear him. Absolutely not. From here, Black Box can't make contact with the rest of the team, so they sort of are forced to move in. Mal and Naomi blow a hole in the hull and drop into the ship. They make their way to a hatch and drop into it, depositing them into another access shaft, and from there they make their way into another passage. They don't know where Staffen and Vaz were, and the ship is nearly 2 kilometers long, so it's going to take some searching. But finally BB made contact. He tells them about what's happening between him and Sinks and what's going on with the ship, as well as the 16 living Kygyar still on the ship. They turn off their suit's oxygen in case they need it for later, and they start using the ship's atmosphere. And they try to talk to the Jackals. The gist of the conversation here is that they have another ship waiting outside. You don't take the offer to leave now, and the Jackals just say, make us. So they blow a charge in the door. 5 Jackals are in this corridor, and they have absolutely no chance against a Spartan, let alone a Spartan and an ODST. BB then showed Naomi the way to the bridge, and they head that way. All while she's thinking about the fact that her father is somewhere on this ship. On the bridge, BB is taunting Cholvan, who says that if they can't have the ship, they'll destroy it. Now, she said this because the conversation is being broadcast throughout the ship, and she hoped that it would tell the remaining Jackals somewhere on the ship to set a plasma torpedo to explode. This would hopefully lure out the engineer, and they'd be able to take him and force him to open the doors for them. But as they're setting this up, they hear a thump. Then another, and they see bulges in the bridge's door. Naomi is literally punching her way into the room. She tore a small hole, killed 1 Jackal, and that forces Cholvan to order the other Jackals to detonate a plasma torpedo. At first they were just going to pose, but now they meant it. They retreat into another shaft. Sinks reports to Staffen that the Jackals set multiple plasma torpedoes to detonate, which would detonate the ship's reactor as well. Everyone has to leave, and they have only 15 minutes to do so. This is a disaster. The team spent weeks looking for this ship, and now in 15 minutes it would be gone, with them inside of it if they don't hurry. Vaz and Staffen waste 2 minutes trying to contact Osman to have Stanley back off because this explosion would be massive, and also trying to contact Mal and Naomi. Finally, Vaz is assured by BB that he already let Osman know and is directing the other team as they speak. When he looked around, he realized that Staffen had disappeared. He runs back to the shuttle bay to find Staffen not there. He runs into the dropship to find Staffen not there. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he sees one of the Covenant dropships, a Spirit, rotate and move. As his helmet comms flare to life with Staffen's voice. He says that he wants his little girl out, but there's a problem. Spirit dropships aren't fast enough to escape the blast. He needed to leave now if he had any chance of survival, but he refused. Dev was in Tarkart outside, the perfect person for this job, but there were 2 assholes in the way. Staffen in the Spirit and Vaz in his Pelican. Osman ordered Mal to leave, but BB claimed that he was deaf to this order. Then has BB access his personal data pad and send Staffen Naomi's file. At least a little bit, but it's been 9 minutes. 6 minutes left. BB goes into the Spirit and he tells Staffen about the document. And then he tells Staffen that he wiped the routing data because he didn't want Vaz to be shot for being a decent man. But while BB is on the ship, he notices that putting a slip-space drive into a dropship is not unique to Port Stanley's engineers. Sinks had done the same thing to this Spirit as well. BB tells Staffen that in a few minutes he's going to forget all about this ship, the document, and this whole conversation because Staffen gave his word that he'd end all insurgent activity. In other words, he's free to go. Nobody will know this ship had a slip-space drive, and without one he'd never be able to get far enough away and he'd be vaporized. BB then pipes Naomi's radio signal into the Spirit so Staffen could just have a few more moments with her. There's around a minute now to extract. The conversation continues. BB tells him that he won't find any trace of him on the Spirit systems and gives Staffen a code to relay any message within the next 7 years. And then he tells Staffen he's sorry. That he's truly sorry. This likely comes from Black Box's personality matrix. We often say that AIs don't have the personality or memories of their brain donor, but that might not be totally true. Like I said a while ago, BB's brain donor was a man named Graham Albin, a doctor who worked on the Spartan 2 program, and because of what he did, he ended his own life. This is a suicide note. One has to be careful with suicide notes, even these days when I hope we all accept that our lives are our own to do with as we choose. Someone will still see it as insanity, or cowardice, or an affront to some god, as if we are no more than slaves of the divine, with none of the free will those same believers claim God gives us. So this will be explicit. I am perfectly sane, and it's my life that's been cowardly, not my death. And if there is a God, I am prepared to stand before him and tell him what a careless, negligent, unloving father he is to let us behave as we do. He should have been more forthcoming with the thunderbolts and smiting. But why blame God? I don't believe he exists. But even if he does, we should be capable of morality without him, and are. His purpose is mysterious because he hasn't got one, and if he has, it isn't benign. We face extinction by a genocidal alien culture that also believes it serves its gods, but we persist in the face of logic ourselves. The devil made us do it. We're only following orders. It was for the greater good. The ends justified the means, and so on ad hypocritical nausea, blaming everything but our own self-created evil. I have taken my life because the Spartan 2 program is a crime against humanity, and I should have had the moral courage to refuse to work on it. I did not. I complied. I've committed a crime against life and contributed to many deaths. So if nobody else can or will punish me for that, I must sentence myself and carry it out. I knew Spartan 2 was morally indefensible. That probably makes me more loathsome even than Catherine Halsey. I understood how wrong it was, but she never appeared to recognize that, and all the time I knew her. She made all the right noises, but that's all they were. Noises. Her actions were all enthusiasm. Your consciousness is what you do, not what you think or what you say. It's also something you do when it has to be done, not as an afterthought when you're forced to face up to your wrongdoings. Remorse is cheap and easy. It's an insult. My awareness obliged me to act, but I did nothing. I cooperated, and my compliance enabled something monstrous. I didn't slaughter millions, but there is no sliding scale in atrocities, even if the robotic imagination of the law requires fixed thresholds. Each death, each act of suffering is a complete and quantifying act of evil in itself. Humans instinctively norm. We behave like others around us because compliance is our survival strategy. No matter how intelligent, sensible, or kind, 99% of human beings will carry out the most appalling acts if the rest of their tribe is doing the same. And most of our conscious acts are simply postscript rationalizations of our hardwired, unconscious decisions. And yet I knew what I was being asked to do was wrong, and still did it. Being a normal human is no excuse for that. The Mortal Dictata Act defends many things, but mostly enshrines the individuality and validity of each human life. I hesitate to call it a human rights charter because that term has been utterly devalued of its intent, completely distorted over the centuries. The Mortal Dictata are a suite of laws that require of us the most basic moral duty that we owe our own species. They barred us from creating humans for the purpose of harvesting tissue, even if that human has an otherwise independent life. They barred us from enslaving others, and they barred us from cloning entire humans. The Mortal Dictata recognizes a central principle that no human should be brought into existence or co-opted primarily as a convenience for others. Each life is equal and valid. Spartan 2 broke that law on every level. I helped it happen, and because of that, I could no longer justify my own existence. I have no right to ask anything of my fellow human beings following my death, seeing as I failed to meet the minimum requirements of what it means to be a human. But this is a personal request to Vice Admiral Margaret Perengoski, Cinconi, under whose command these acts took place. I would ask that my brain be retained for the AI donor program, specifically for an AI dedicated to the support and protection of the Spartan 2s. I have taken my life by a method that causes least damage to my brain. I know how to do that. Of course I am, or was, a neurosurgeon and psychologist. This isn't an attempt to squeeze out a few more years of pitiful existence that I don't deserve. I know the AI based on my brain won't have my memories or my personality, and that I shall be very dead. But I owe it to the children and the families whose lives were ruined and stolen to put whatever I can back into making those Spartans' daily existence safer and less miserable. If anything of me survives, then it might be what I wanted in my final moments, the need to do something good for those children. If you can make this happen, Margaret, and I am wrong about God or the devil, then I shall put in a good word for you, regardless at which gate I arrive. You are always more human than I ever managed to be. Your friend, Graham. So throughout this whole book, it's clear that BB hates Halsey, and he cares deeply for Naomi and Osmond. We also know that AIs don't have their memories or personalities of their brain donors, but I have a couple theories. One, like Graham just said, that these emotions ran so deeply within him during his final moments that they did, in fact, break the norm of AIs having personality traits and emotions of their donors. I mean, the emotion of remorse was so strong that it drove him to sentence himself to death and even carry out the act. He says that if anything of him survives, hopefully it's his last thoughts of that. Or, two, Parangoski was somehow able to influence BB when he was being created. An AI is really nothing but code, and so maybe somewhere within his matrix she was able to grant his dying wish and implant some code that would force him to care deeply for the Spartans on an emotional level. I also think it's important that BB clearly had some feeling of remorse or even respect towards Staffan. He always called Staffan Sir. He apologized to Staffan, even though he didn't know that his brain donor had anything to do with the situation. Now, he may have been apologizing on the behalf of ONI as an organization that he belonged to, but I think it's deeper than that. Mal and Naomi are able to make it off the ship. Vaz and Dev also get clear, and they tried to save Sinks, but he just wouldn't budge. So they all jump into slipspace. Staffan opens up his spirit's door, Sinks floats in, and the ship explodes. Black Box sends a report to Parangoski, and in it he states that Staffan was killed in the explosion. Remember, he had forced himself to forget the last conversation he had with Staffan, and he reports that the ship was gone, no longer a threat. Osmond also has a meeting with Parangoski, and she tells her that the team is going to have some shore leave, and that she's going to look into her own personal file, to learn her past like Naomi did, like Naomi was strong enough to do. Then Parangoski gives Osmond a crucial piece of advice. She tells her to go get drunk with the ODSTs, have fun, and be human, because she won't be able to do that when she's queen of ONI. After this, BB has a conversation with Parangoski, and she asks if he'll ever look into where he originated from, as he had the opportunity to, or the access to do. And he tells her that he won't. At least not yet. Maybe someday when he's gone rampant, and that he'll ask Osmond to terminate him when that happens. He then asks if Parangoski thinks that was cowardly, suicide, if suicide is cowardly. Please remember what I just read you. Parangoski considered herself a friend of Dr. Graham, who took his life 20 years ago. And she answers that she doesn't think it's cowardly. Suicide could be many things. It can be desperate. It can be brave and noble. It can be sensible and tragic. But really, the ultimate exercise of free will. But certainly not cowardly. She then tells BB that if he ever does look into his own file, to remember that his brain donor did the right thing. Should I stop? Let's stop. I just talked a lot about suicide, saying it could be noble and brave and an exercise in free will. I am not condoning suicide in any which way, okay? That's just what the book says, not what I say. If you need help and you are having thoughts of taking your own life, definitely seek help. Do not take moral advice from a Halo book. It is a sci-fi shooter. And while, yes, I sometimes, as you guys have seen, I cry in these videos fairly frequently, because I do get very emotional about this universe. I would never, ever, ever take something that is said in one of these books as actual life advice. If you are having these thoughts, Definitely don't go read over Graham's suicide note and think, yeah, okay, I'm going to do that. No, no, no. You need to get help, okay? So, I just thought that should be said. Now, let's get back to the video. Back in the ship, the ODSTs were in the gym. Naomi was stargazing, and Phillips was with the engineers. Osmond had just started reading her file, but just before she does, BB asks her to do what he had just discussed with Parangoski, which is switch him off when he starts to lose it, and she promises that she will. And then they go through her file together. They learn that her real name is Serin Celik. Her mother's name was Pana, P-A-N-A, and her mother was an addict and a prostitute. Father was unknown. She was born on the non-glassed colony of Cascade, that she was neglected, left at home regularly, and on the streets regularly. She was lured away by an ONI officer who offered her a cheeseburger. Which, like, same. That'd probably work for me too, dude. You know? And actually, Serin didn't even get a clone. Her teacher reported her as missing, and her mother had been missing for about 30 years. Miss Leandro, the teacher, bothered the police about her missing for years. Mrs. Leandro was actually still alive on Cascade, and Osmond decided to go see her. So the team heads that way. The team gets to be tourists while she meets the woman that cared for her as a child. Osmond went down to the planet and took a taxi throughout the town. A nice town, clean streets, updated older houses, and finally she found her teacher's house. And the meeting went well. At first, the teacher was shocked, hands on mouth crying, and then she wrapped the Rear Admiral in a hug, laughing and crying, and started talking about her life. She tells her older teacher, or what she could, about the program that she was taken into, about her life so far. She tries to remember her teacher, but she just can't. It's been too long, and that is until Miss Leandro offers her some baklava, and she tastes it, and the taste, like, sends her right back to childhood, and she remembers. While that conversation is happening, Mal and Vaz are at a hotel bar. Mal is having quite a bit of fun, but Vaz was, miserable. He hated how things ended, that Staffen was dead. He was beating himself up for not taking BB with him on their first run to Venezia. Then he could have grabbed the Pious Inquisitor when they were on board, and that could have been that. Staffen and Edvin would have never even known, and Staffen would still be alive. Pissed, sure, but alive. Dev and Phillips went on a bit of a date together, going to a concert together. Vaz and Mal ate dinner, got drinks, and then headed back to the base that they were bunking in, and when they checked in, a package had been sent to them through fleet mail. The team all headed back to the Port Stanley, where Vaz studied the box that he got shipped to him. He found the sender's scribbled signature, which was Mike Amberley, which was Mike Spencer's alias when he was on Venezia. Inside was a device with a power cord. He had no idea what it was, but with it was a small doll-sized chair and a slip of paper. It read, "I'll keep my promise, thank you." Vaz got Adge to fit a power cord onto the device, and then he went to go show Naomi, and with the lights off, they looked up, turned it on, and saw the dazzling stars of Sansar projected above them, and with the daughter of the man who he thought was dead, he wept. Unfortunately, from here, the team pretty much has been forgotten about. After the Kilo 5 trilogy, Vaz, Mal, Naomi, Devro, and Phillips have never been seen again. But we do have some information. We know that they continue to fuel ex-Covenant factions to fight against each other, including the Servants of the Abiding Truth, the Children of Othsanen, and the Keepers of the One Freedom, the latter two being Brute-led factions. We actually do have some good information on Black Box and Serin Osmond. A few months after the Pious Inquisitor, Osmond recruited the Spartan Threes and Inspector Veda Lopus and set up the Ferret Squad. We know Osmond also left the team as of 2555 to become the person that she was basically raised to become after the Spartan program chewed her up and spit her out the Queen of Oni. She debriefed the Master Chief after Requiem and the New Phoenix incident. Black Box would stage a trial for an AI named Iona that was suing for her right to live, and he would also participate in Hunt the Truth. When the Created rose, Black Box would save Osmond and Hood by sending them to a secret planet he had set up for just such an occasion called Rosbox World, and after they were recovered, BB had reached his 7-year expiration date. Once they returned to Earth and extracted crucial data from him that was left over from his brain donor that led to Chloe Eden Hall, the last living clone of Dr. Halsey, Osmond made good on her promise and shut down the AI. That is the last bit of information on anyone in Kilo 5. So, thank you all very much for embarking on this journey with me. Thank you all for watching this video. Thank you to our Patreon supporters. It means the world to me. It really does. If you've made it this far and you want to see more, I stream 3 times a week on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. I'd love to see you there. Also, consider joining the Discord where we're doing game nights about once a month at this point. I need to increase it to about once every 2 weeks. Also in the Discord as well as Patreon, I put a release schedule for my videos for the entire year of 2026. We have a lot of videos planned, which is great. So, yeah. Thank you all so much for watching. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next one.